expand. Meng Hao was completely shocked to be able to sense the chi flow of the mountain and sea realm here, and it suddenly caused him to recall the fact that the mountain and sea lord of the 8th mountain and sea was supposed to be from the Meng clan. However, after arriving in the 8th mountain and sea, everything he had heard and seen seemed to indicate the contrary, as if his memories were incorrect. Meng Hao had been confused by that from the beginning, especially after hearing that the lord of the 8th mountain and sea was called Heaven God. From then on, he had begun to speculate about the situation. Heaven God, has no surname attached to it. Eyes flickering, he looked at the statue, sensing the chi flow of the mountain and sea realm. That was something that no one other than him could detect. Based on the fact that the statue's face had been scraped off, Meng Hao got the feeling that there was some secret connection between Heaven God and the Meng clan in the past. "We're home," Meng Da shouted. "Finally, we're home. Meng Chen, we're home." Meng Da stood next to Meng Hao, looking excitedly at the Meng clan continent and taking in a deep breath. From the look on his face, it was as if he suddenly had a new lease on life. "Home?" Meng Hao murmured. When he thought about the members of his grandfather's bloodline, his eyes flickered and turned to focus on one of the 9 smaller continents attached to the larger one. According to the soul-searching he had performed on the Meng clan cultivators on the ship, his grandfather's bloodline was on the smallest continent among the 9. Soon, the ship landed on the central continent, in the huge city that surrounded the statue. That was also the location of the Meng clan ancestral mansion. Meng Da flew out to where hundreds of Meng clan cultivators were all waiting to receive him. Once he appeared, they clasped hands, bowed, and said, "We offer respectful greetings, 9th young lord." Of course, Meng Da was the 9th young lord, and almost as soon as he heard that greeting, he seemed to revert to his old silkpant self. He nodded slightly as people clustered around him to escort him off into the distance. His father and mother had long since departed, and just as Meng Da was about to leave, he seemed to remember Meng Chen and turned. He looked at Meng Hao with a smile, then waved his hand, sending a jade pendant flying out. Meng Hao caught it, after which Meng Da spoke in a loud voice, "I'll come looking for you in a few days." Meng Hao hefted the jade pendant and smiled. At first, nobody in the area had paid the slightest attention to him, but after Meng Da gave him the jade pendant, people began to take notice of him, and their eyes glittered. Meng Hao didn't care about all of that. He disembarked from the ship and then looked around at all the buildings. The entire place was unfamiliar, and the architecture was circular in design, much more flowing and unconstrained than the Fang clan's orderliness and stark, angular layout. As for the ancestral mansion, it was also constructed in a circular shape and gave off a sophisticated, courtly air. Numerous cultivators could be seen in the ancestral city as Meng Hao walked down the streets, and he quickly noticed that most of them were in the spirit realm. Immortal realm cultivators were less common. For every 100 people he saw, only a handful were immortals. There were no shops in the area, nor were there any inns. In fact, it would probably be more appropriate to call this place the outskirts of the ancestral mansion, rather than a separate city. However, in size alone it was comparable to a city. It was divided into certain districts, just like the Fang clan was. There were the districts in the east, west, south, and north, within which were huge courtyard residences where important clan members from the various bloodlines resided. There was no central district, nor was there a mausoleum, which might be expected. However, Meng Hao could sense 5 unique auras inside the huge statue itself. Those auras were clearly auras of the Tao realm. However, of those 5 auras, 2 were very dim, almost on the point of being extinguished. The other 3 were much more vigorous, with one of them belonging to Meng Da's grandfather. 5 Tao realm cultivators. 3 have flourishing auras, 2 of them being 1 essence and 1 2 essences. Of the weak auras, there's 1 Tao lord and another, who I can't ascertain. However, from what I can tell, that aura is on the verge of being extinguished. Meng Hao looked away from the statue, eyes flickering as he sent his divine sense spreading out even further. It only took a moment for his divine sense to fill the entire ancestral mansion, and for all the living beings therein to appear in his mind. He glanced back at the statue, surprised that none of the 5 cultivators inside had detected his divine sense, nor activated any of the Meng clan's defenses. Meng Hao then thoughtfully began to retract his divine sense and head in the direction of the continent where his grandfather's bloodline resided. However, in almost the same moment that he made to leave, he suddenly stopped in place. There was a scene playing out somewhere nearby that he could see within his divine sense, which he then focused on. An older woman could be seen in a courtyard residence, face ashen as she pleaded with a cold, arrogant middle-aged man. A younger woman lay at the man's feet, covered with bruises and wounds. Her right hand was clenched tightly around something, and her face was deathly pale as the middle-aged man kicked her viciously over and over again. "Big bro, stop," the older woman pleaded. "Mengru is just worried about her bloodline relative, that's why she stole the medicinal pill. Big bro." "She's only a servant," the man spat, "and she actually dared to steal a medicinal pill. It doesn't matter why she did it, she deserves to die. If I don't beat her to death, then wouldn't everyone else try to imitate her?" The middle-aged man's eyes gleamed with killing intent as he reached down and grabbed the young woman by the hair. She was pretty but had a red birthmark on her face which the man seemed disgusted by. "You're not bad except for that birthmark. How nauseating." "Big bro, Ryer's older cousin is in the immortal realm. He's one of the 9th young lord's bodyguards. All she took was a medicinal pill. You don't have to go so far." The older woman continued to plead anxiously, occasionally glancing down at the younger woman who lay there, blood oozing out of her mouth. The older woman had no way to know that, even as the words left her mouth, Meng Hao was actually only a few streets away in the ancestral mansion. A tremor ran through him, and he turned, his expression icy. He had already heard that most of the members of his grandfather's bloodline were stationed in the houses of other clan members, where they worked as servants in exchange for cultivation resources. As of this moment, Meng Hao was certain that the young woman he was seeing with his divine sense was a member of his grandfather's bloodline, a younger bloodline cousin of Meng Chen. Meng Hao didn't hesitate for even a moment. He took a step forward and vanished, his action undetectable even by the 5 patriarchs. Back in the courtyard residence, the middle-aged man began to laugh coldly in response to the words just spoken to him. "Her older cousin, you mean that pretty boy Meng what's-his-name? Meng Chen, right? You think a bodyguard deserves to get face from me?" The man knelt down and grabbed Meng Ru's hand. Expression icy, he began to break her fingers one by one. She trembled from the pain but gritted her teeth and didn't make a sound. Soon, the medicinal pill in her hand was revealed, which was already dissolving because of the blood that had oozed onto it. The middle-aged man grabbed it and threw into a nearby pond. Meng Ru's eyes went wide. She hadn't shed a single tear before this moment, not even when her fingers were being broken. But now that she saw the medicinal pill dissolving in the pond water, tears began to flow down her face. "Oh, what's this? Crying?" The man laughed and reached down as if to wipe away the tears. Before he could touch her face, though, a hand appeared out of nowhere and grabbed his own hand. The man stared in shock, then let out a shriek as he saw Meng Hao standing there next to the young Meng Ru. Without even thinking about it, he took a step backward. "Meng Chen, how dare you?" Although the man had been frightened after realizing who it was, he seemed to regain his courage. With a shout, he unleashed his cultivation base, which was only in the Dao-seeking stage. "Big bro," Meng Ru said, slowly looking up. When she laid eyes on Meng Hao, she began to weep and shake from the humiliation she had just endured. "Get your hands off me, Meng Chen," the middle-aged man said. "Damn it, what gall you have. If you dare to hurt me, I'll tell my big bro and he'll wipe out your entire bloodline. Apparently you've forgotten that I'm also surnamed Meng. Or is that you don't consider us to be part of the Meng clan anymore?" Meng Hao had put some thought into the current miserable state of his grandfather's bloodline, but to see what was actually happening made him feel like a knife was slicing away at his heart. Meng Hao suddenly clenched his hand down, causing cracking and popping sounds to ring out. The middle-aged man screamed as Meng Hao crushed his hand into a bloody pulp. Terror and pain washed through him, but even as the scream left his mouth, Meng Hao patted his back. That motion caused more cracking sounds to echo out as each and every last bone in the man's body was shattered into powder. Without a skeleton to hold him up, the man collapsed into a pile of twitching flesh. No more sounds came out of his mouth as he lay there, no longer in the shape of a human. His current state was one of pain that far exceeded that of death. The woman standing off to the side was so frightened that her jaw dropped. The suddenness of what had occurred left her in a state of disbelief. As for Meng Ru, she was also staring in shock. "Big bro," she murmured as Meng Hao helped her to her feet. He placed his hand over hers, healing her broken fingers and injured internal organs. As she regained lucidity, she began to pant as she suddenly recalled something. Grasping Meng Hao's forearm, she said, "Big bro, hurry, we have to get back. It's grandmother, she's dying." "Grandmother, Grandma Meng." A tremor ran through Meng Hao. Without the slightest hesitation, he picked Meng Ru up in his arms and flew off into the distance. 1. As you may be aware, there are numerous very specific forms of address for relatives in Chinese. In this case, Meng Ru specifically mentions her paternal grandmother, which causes Meng Hao to think of his maternal grandmother. This would indicate that Meng Ru is an actual member of the Meng clan, with her father having been surnamed Meng, whereas Meng Hao is related to them through his mother, but would not be considered an actual member of the clan. After all, his father's surname is Fang. I'm going to forego translating the literal forms of address because they tend to get very clunky, especially when used in dialogue as a form of address. Instead, Meng Hao's maternal grandmother will be Grandma Meng or simply grandmother depending on the context. Please note her surname is not Meng. In Chinese culture, women don't change their surname upon marriage. However, you can address a female by the surname of her husband in Chinese culture, assuming you use the right form of address. If I remember correctly, Meng Hao's mom Meng Li was even called Madame Fang at one point. Similar forms of address exist for other relatives. I did the same thing in the past with Meng Hao's grandfathers. Instead of referring to them as paternal and maternal grandfathers, I've been calling them Grandpa Fang and Grandpa Meng. I think this way makes it much more simple to understand who is being referred to, and at the same time keeps the same familial feeling as the original Chinese. By the way, astute readers might remember a few times where an old Lady Meng was mentioned, a real mythological character who serves people the tea of forgetfulness in the underworld. Meng Hao's grandmother does not have any connection to that woman. When he left, the older woman who remained behind in the courtyard finally screamed, which attracted the attention of other clan members. When they arrived, they saw the boneless middle-aged man lying there and they gasped. Who did this? This is a cruelty worse than death. Chapter 1254, Grandma Meng. Chapter 1255, I'm here to defend you. Meng Hao was enraged, but Meng Ru's words caused his heart to tremble. It was impossible to describe what they meant to him. After all, Meng Chen's grandmother was his grandma Meng as well. His grandpa Fang and grandpa Meng had gone missing, and his grandma Fang had long since passed away. To suddenly find out that his grandma Meng was still alive caused his heart to begin to pound, and he wished he could be at her side instantly. However, he hadn't lost his ability to think straight, so although he sped as fast as possible in her direction, he also concealed himself so that no one could detect his presence. He soon appeared in the air outside of the ancestral mansion, and then sped off into the distance with Meng Ru. Meng Ru was in the nascent soul stage, so to her, her older cousin Meng Chen, who was in the immortal realm, was the most promising and important person in the bloodline. He had an incredible cultivation base, and was in fact the hope of the entire bloodline. Although Meng Ru didn't understand the vast gap between the immortal realm and the ancient realm, in her mind, the speed with which they were traveling was something that should come naturally to someone like her cousin. In fact, to her, Meng Chen was the heaven of their bloodline. If anyone could have observed what was happening, they would be shocked. In the space of a few breaths of time, he took Meng Ru across the starry sky to appear, directly on the continent where his grandfather's bloodline resided. Didn't need any directions from Meng Ru to know where to go. He flew across the continent, sending his divine sense spreading out until he found a village on the border which almost seemed like a city of mortals. There, he identified a mansion which appeared to be filled with quite a few grieving people. In the instant that his divine sense touched the place, he noticed one room, in which he sensed an aura that had to be a blood relative. Grandma Meng, he thought, trembling. He had never even imagined that his grandmother would still be alive, so at the moment his heart was pounding in the same way that Meng Chen's would have were he here. With Meng Ru in tow, he shot toward the village and then appeared inside the mansion. Almost immediately, cries of astonishment could be heard in response to his arrival. As he looked around, he noticed that, of the dozens of people in the residence, all were women. Not a single man was present. It's Chenner's back. Big bro. Almost immediately, everyone began to get excited, and their eyes turned red as tears welled up. Meng Hao glanced at everyone, but there was no time to examine them closely. He instantly walked toward the room where his grandmother was located. The other clan members stepped back, making a path for him as he sped forward like the wind. As soon as he entered the room, he saw an old woman lying on a wooden pallet. Next to the old woman sat two old men, who seemed to be wheezing and in pain, as if it were difficult to even just be sitting up straight. They were very old, as if they had lived for countless years, and their auras were very weak. It even seemed a struggle for them to keep their eyes open, as if they were staying alive by sheer force of willpower. There were also three middle-aged women in the room. They had clearly been beauties when they were young, but had been ravaged by the passing of years, and were also very weak. They also seemed to be hanging on by sheer force of willpower. As for the woman on the pallet, she was completely covered with wrinkles and seemed profoundly ancient. She radiated the stench of decay and was withered to the point of being little more than skin and bones. Her aura was so weak that it seemed as if she might die at any moment. However, despite that frail aura, the old woman had a certain strength to her. The wrinkles on her forehead seemed to bear testimony to all of the pressure she had lived with throughout the years. As soon as Meng Hao laid eyes on her, he trembled and walked forward. This was his grandma Meng, and the mere sight of her caused tears to spill down his cheeks. His heart hurt as he examined her body, finding more than a dozen internal injuries. Furthermore, her chi passageways were completely withered. As soon as he entered the room, the three middle-aged women turned to look at him. "Chenner, you're back," one of them said. Their gazes were kind, and they did their best to hide the grief in their expressions, but Meng Hao was Meng Chen, and as such, he could see it. As for the two old men in the seats, they struggled to keep their eyes open as they looked at Meng Hao with kind gazes. Meng Hao wasn't sure who all these people were, but after laying eyes on the old men, he could guess. He also had his speculations about who the three middle-aged women were. He immediately dropped to his knees and kowtowed, knocking his head onto the ground. Then he got back to his feet and approached his grandma Meng, who lay there with her eyes closed. Meng Hao reached out and placed his hand onto her arm, then sent some of his life force surging into her. However, almost as soon as it entered her, it immediately dispersed. That caused a gleam of shock and anger to flicker deep in his eyes. He quickly sent some divine sense into his grandmother, and was shocked to find that hidden inside her body were 9 black spikes. They were buried deep within her flesh, and even stabbed into her soul. Those 9 nails were preventing Meng Hao's life force from entering his grandmother's body. Even more infuriating to Meng Hao was that, inside his grandmother, he could detect poison. It was a unique poison designed to corrode the cultivation base and eat away at her life force. Any other person would probably be dead already, but Meng Hao's grandmother was hanging on tenaciously, presumably because her cultivation base had been so profound. Meng Hao pulled his hand back, eyes flashing. Next, his right hand performed an incantation gesture, and then he rapidly pushed down on her body 9 times. Each time he pushed down, he did so in the location of one of the black spikes. When he was finished, his grandmother shivered, after which he performed another incantation gesture, and then pushed his hand down onto the pressure point beneath her nose, pouring more life force into her. When the 3 middle-aged women saw what was happening, their eyes began to shine brightly, and they seemed surprised. However, they didn't seem to be suspicious about what was happening. In contrast, the 2 old men who were sitting there in seeming discomfort suddenly trembled, and they stared at Meng Hao with wide, disbelieving eyes. As Meng Hao's life force slowly flowed into his grandmother, the aura of death and rot that had previously filled her suddenly dissipated a bit. Before, her soul fire had been on the brink of being extinguished, but now it burned a bit more brightly than before. Even her complexion looked a bit better. Meng Hao pulled his hand back. He didn't dare to pour in too much life force. His grandmother was already on the verge of dying, so if he wasn't careful, he could easily push her over that edge. However, he was still confident that with a bit of care, she would be able to recover fully. After he pulled his hand back, he slapped his bag of holding to produce a medicinal pill, which he then placed in her mouth. Finally, he stood up and looked over at the 2 old men, who were clearly very shocked. If he wasn't mistaken, these 2 old men would be the blood brothers of his grandpa Meng, making them his granduncles. Apparently, they and his grandma Meng were the only surviving members of the senior generation. As for the 3 middle-aged women, the fact that they were here in this room, and not outside, indicated to Meng Hao that they were the beloved partners of his uncles, the blood brothers of his mother. It was at this point that Meng Hao was shocked to find that the 3 women, as well as his 2 granduncles, all had 9 spikes buried inside their bodies. The main difference was that the spikes inside the women were silver and not black. Meng Hao quietly produced some medicinal pills, which he respectfully handed to his 2 granduncles. The 2 old men looked at him. Although they were so weak that it seemed even a mortal could kill them, it was possible to see the power and dignity that still existed in their eyes as they looked at Meng Hao. Gradually, their gazes turned kind. Opening their mouths, they consumed the medicinal pills and then closed their eyes. Meng Hao clasped hands and bowed, then turned to leave. As he did, the 3 middle-aged women watched him with puzzled looks. After leaving the room, Meng Hao's face darkened. He looked over the dozen or so younger women outside, which included Meng Ru. "What happened here?" he asked in a gravely voice. His words almost immediately seemed to calm the surrounding bloodline clan members. It was the Su clan one. Quick note about the Su clan that the character Su here is not the same character as Su Qing's surname. They pushed things too far. They kidnapped Meng Han, and then sent people here to say that we had to send them grandmother's corpse to get her back. The Su clan has gone too far. They've bullied us for years, but we're surnamed Meng. We're actual members of the Ming clan. They're just a vassal clan who was given land on this continent by the clan. What right do they have to bully us like this? It wasn't even the direct bloodline of the Su clan that did this, just one of their auxiliary branches. Just what are they thinking? 27 members of our bloodline have already died at their hands over the years, and all in vain. Nobody speaks up for us at all. And this time, they actually threatened grandmother, who has protected us for all these years. I'm here to help Grandma Meng and defend the clan on Meng Chen's behalf, Meng Hao murmured to himself. I'll continue to do the protecting around here. He sent his divine will out, and then began to walk forward, quickly vanishing. When he reappeared, he was in midair, looking down at the continent below. It only took a moment for his divine sense to locate the auxiliary branch of the Su clan that had just been mentioned. It wasn't too far away, located in a good-sized city that resembled the Ming clan ancestral mansion, meaning that it wasn't a true city, but rather a clan stronghold. At the main gate of the city was a sign with one large character. Su. Quite a few clan members inhabited the city, and most were mortal. There appeared to be only a dozen or so cultivators, virtually all of them in the spirit realm. There was only one old man who was in the immortal realm. Even counting him, no one in the city counted as anything more than ants to Meng Hao. Fury burning in his heart, he stepped forward and was inside the Su clan's ancestral mansion. No one detected his presence, and as he went along, he didn't hurt the mortals, but he crippled the spirit meridians that would allow them to practice cultivation. As for the cultivators, it didn't matter what they were doing at the moment, they simply exploded into clouds of gore. As for the old man in the immortal realm, his head exploded even as he sat cross-legged in meditation. All of the cultivators died. Meng Hao left, taking an unconscious youth with him, a young man who was covered with wounds as if from torture. Despite the injuries, his jaw was clenched shut, as if to indicate that he hadn't begged for mercy even once. Killing only this handful of people didn't abate Meng Hao's fury in the least. Sending his divine sense out, he found another of the Su clan's auxiliary branches, and headed in that direction next. 1, 2, 3. Meng Hao went to a total of 16 auxiliary branches. Not a single cultivator saw his face there, all of them exploded. With that, Meng Hao eyed the Su clan ancestral mansion in the center of the entire content. He snorted coldly and was preparing to go exterminate the entire clan when, all of a sudden, his expression flickered, and he looked back in the direction of his grandfather's bloodline. He could sense that his grandma Meng had awakened. Chapter 1256, Make a Name. Meng Hao silently turned and headed back to the clan residence. When he arrived, he handed over the unconscious youth he had just rescued, then straightened his clothes and headed toward his grandmother's room. He didn't immediately enter, but instead clasped hands and bowed deeply, then stood there with his head lowered. After a long moment, the door opened, and the three middle-aged women filed out, glancing at him with curious expressions as they walked past. Then, an ancient voice spoke from within the room. Come. Meng Hao bowed once more, then entered, closing the door behind him. When he looked up, he saw his grandma Meng sitting in a chair, her complexion much improved. She seemed weaker than a mortal, but at the same time, solemn and filled with an indescribable dignity. Her eyes were dim, but when her gaze settled on someone, it seemed to be filled with a certain might. On either side of her sat the two old men, who were also much improved. They were staring at Meng Hao without the slightest expressions on their faces. The first person to speak was his grandmother. She looked at him and slowly asked, "Who are you?" Her voice was not backed by the power of her cultivation base, but seemed to inherently contain something that caused the natural laws in the area to fluctuate. Anyone who heard her voice would be affected by the mysterious pressure it contained. Greetings, Grandma Meng. Greetings, granduncles, I am Meng Hao. Meng Hao then dropped to his knees and began to kowtow. The old-timers were visibly moved when they realized that he had used the forms of address from eternal relatives. You, Meng Hao's grandmother gaped in shock. Something clicked in her mind and an expression of disbelief could then be seen. Meng Hao rose to his feet, and as he did, his facial features transformed from Meng Chen's into his own. Then he produced a jade slip from his bag of holding, which he respectfully handed over to his grandmother. Next, he sent some cultivation-based power into the jade slip, which then projected a screen into the air. On that screen was the face of a woman, none other than Meng Hao's mother. Then, as the three old-timers looked on, he bit the tip of his finger and dropped a bit of blood onto the jade slip. The jade slip absorbed it, turning blood red in the process. This jade slip had been given to Meng Hao before parting ways with his mother. She had told him that if he ever encountered any relatives from her side of the family, he could use it to prove his identity. Meng Hao's grandmother began shaking, and the two old men on either side of her looked incredibly excited. In fact, there had been few times in their entire lives in which they had been this excited. "Lear, you're Lear's son, Fang Meng Hao." His grandmother stared at him, breath coming in ragged pants. Suddenly, a tremor ran through her as if something had just occurred to her. "Is your mother well?" Meng Hao immediately stepped forward and offered his arm to his grandmother to support her. "Grandma Meng, my mother is in the 9th mountain and sea, safe and healthy." "As long as she's safe and healthy, that's what's important," his grandmother murmured, tears rolling down her cheeks. She raised a trembling hand to stroke Meng Hao's cheek, her eyes shining with kindness. "You're such a good kid. Why are you here? Where's Meng Chen?" Meng Hao sighed, and then gave a simple recounting of how he had come to the 8th mountain and sea, and then the circumstances in which he met Meng Chen. When his grandmother and granduncles heard about how he had exterminated the Black Soul Society, and then slaughtered Tao Lords and other such powerful experts, their eyes went wide. Then they heard about Meng Chen's final words, and their eyes dimmed. Chenner was also such a good kid. After a moment of silence, Meng Hao looked at the old-timers and asked, "Grandma Meng, granduncles, I very much want to know what happened here. Why is our bloodline in such decline? What are those black spikes inside of you? And also, who poisoned you? Where is everyone else of the senior generation?" They exchanged silent glances for a moment, and then one of Meng Hao's granduncles sighed and began to explain. "After your grandpa Meng went to the 9th mountain and sea, he never returned. All the news we got was that it had to do with you, and that he went missing along with your grandpa Fang. Your grandfather's disappearance affected the clan a bit, but not fatally. Back then, there were 7 of us brothers, including your grandfather, plus many sons and grandsons. Although none of us were in the Tao realm, there were many in the ancient realm. We decided not to contend for the place of clan chief, assuming that doing so would prevent conflict within the clan. How could we have ever imagined that everything would change overnight? Although news about what happened in the clan that night never spread, that was the moment the Meng clan fell from the height of their power. Mysterious cultivators invaded and were joined by traitors within the clan. A huge battle was fought, and 2 of our Tao realm patriarchs were killed. 2 others were seriously injured and still haven't recovered. Vast numbers of ancient realm cultivators died, and virtually all of the immortal realm clan members were slaughtered. Our bloodline narrowly managed to escape to this place. However, when we got here, there were 9 mysterious experts waiting, apparently specifically for us. All of our other brothers died, and most of your uncles were killed. The only people left were the women and children. Those 9 mysterious experts wanted to completely wipe out our bloodline, and the slaughter they carried out on us was far more severe than towards any of the auxiliary bloodlines. It almost seemed like their attack on the Meng clan was targeting us specifically. In the critical moment, just when it seemed we would be exterminated, the ancestral statue began to glow and emanated a powerful pressure. It turned into a voice which shouted at the 9 mysterious experts, telling them to be gone. Before they could be driven away, they didn't hesitate for even a moment to kill themselves in order to transform into 9 spikes. The spikes multiplied and then stabbed into our bodies, sealing our cultivation bases. From that day on, the Meng clan in general was in decline, and our bloodline lost all of its cultivators. We wanted to return to the ancestral mansion, but it had already been occupied by other bloodlines, none other than the current 9 bloodlines of the Meng clan. We were forced to settle down here and try to restore our cultivation bases. However, the only result was that we got weaker day by day. More people died, and soon, we were barely able to hold on to life, not willing to even close our eyes lest we die. The 2 uncles of yours who survived could only look on in misery as the older generation was bullied, humiliated, and left gasping for life. After listening to the story, Meng Hao stood there silently for a moment. The explanation given was simple, and he could easily imagine how tragic the entire affair had been. "Grandma Meng, I think I can heal your injuries, but I need some time." Suddenly, he thought of something and continued, "Those 9 mysterious men, did they by any chance happen to have a combined magical technique that summoned a battle axe?" Almost immediately, his grandmother and granduncles looked at him with a start, shivering. "They did use such a magical technique," his grandmother replied. "However, they didn't summon 1 battle axe, they summoned 3. You've seen such a thing before." Meng Hao then recounted what had happened en route back to the Ming clan, which resulted in the 3 old-timers' faces flickering. "So they're coming back, huh?" his grandmother said. Seeing the expressions on their faces, Meng Hao couldn't hold back from asking, "Grandma Meng, those mysterious black-robed men, is there any chance? You know where they come from?" The 3 old-timers didn't respond at first. Finally, his grandmother sighed and said, "The 7th mountain and sea." As soon as the words entered Meng Hao's ears, a tremor ran through him. He looked at his grandmother and the serious expression on her face, and his thoughts raced. Finally, everything turned into 4 words. "Mountain and sea war," he said slowly. The 3 old-timers maintained their silence. Meng Hao's mind trembled. As soon as he thought about the prospect of war between the various mountains and seas, he said, "Grandma Meng, granduncles, the Fang clan in the 9th mountain and sea has become very powerful. Seniors, I can take all of you to the 9th mountain and sea and give you a chance to rise to prominence there." "Hayar," his grandmother said, "your intentions are good, but the Meng clan is our home. We won't give up on it." As for his 2 granduncles, their voices were filled with decisiveness that could sever nails and chop iron as they said, "We were born here, and we'll die here." Meng Hao said nothing more. Clasping hands and bowing, he once again transformed into Meng Chen. Just before leaving, he calmly said, "Grandma Meng, if there really is a mountain and sea war, I'll do my best to protect you. But if I can't, please take my advice. Leave this place and wait for the right opportunity to stage a comeback." Meng Hao then walked out of the room and looked around at the various bloodline clan members in the mansion. Then he waved his hand, and massive rumbling echoed out as the entire bloodline ancestral mansion and the land around it were carved away from the land mass within which it sat. Meng Hao cut away a vast 30,000-meter area, after which he slapped his bag of holding, causing one piece of immortal jade after another to fly out. Organizing them in midair, Meng Hao performed an incantation gesture and pointed out, causing the vast quantity of immortal jade to shoot down toward the land. Each piece that touched the ground shattered, causing boundless immortal chi to spill out like rain. In the blink of an eye, the entire area was filled with a shocking amount of dense immortal chi. Meng Hao then raised his hand and made a grasping motion. Rumbling could be heard as the entire vast area was sealed, ensuring that none of the immortal chi could dissipate. This also made the entire area occupied by his bloodline become like a paradise for immortals. The cultivators practicing cultivation in places like this had vast, indescribable benefits. Meditating here for a day was like spending a month in the outside world. However, Meng Hao still wasn't satisfied. He smacked his bag of holding again, producing even more immortal jade. As that jade shattered, the quality of the immortal chi grew even more profound. Now, meditating here for a day was like spending 2 months outside. The surrounding bloodline clan members were completely shocked. The 3 old-timers in the room, plus the 3 middle-aged women, all gasped and looked at Meng Hao in astonishment. Then Meng Hao's grandmother and granduncles recalled what he had said about exterminating Patriarch Black Soul and killing the other Dao Realm experts, and were completely convinced of the truth of the matter. There were 2 other nearby rooms that suddenly opened, and 2 men walked out. Although they didn't seem very old, their skin was withered and sallow, and their eyes were dim, making them seem very ancient. They were skinny and weak, and even smelled of alcohol, as if they hadn't seen the light of day for many days. Currently, they were staring dumbfounded at the immortal chi. These 2 men were Meng Hao's uncles, the only surviving second-generation members of the bloodline. Meng Hao said calmly, a cold gleam in his eyes, "Go find all of the members of our bloodline who serve in other households. Tell them to come home. If anyone tries to stop you, tell me immediately." The appearance of cultivators from the 7th mountain and sea indicated that a mountain and sea war was brewing. That completely changed Meng Hao's plans. He would no longer lead his grandfather's bloodline to prominence from the shadows. There simply wasn't time for that. His new decision was to take center stage, to make a loud proclamation that no one could dare to provoke this bloodline. The time had come to make a name. Chapter 1257, Sermon on the Tao. Meng Ru nodded excitedly in response to Meng Hao's words. Meng Hao then smacked his bag of holding, and the mastiff flew out. It threw its head back and roared, transforming into a beam of red light that carried Mengru off into the distance. With the mastiff to protect her, no one would be able to cause trouble for Mengru as she went about accomplishing her task. Meng Hao looked around the bloodline mansion, at his excited relatives, and then took a deep breath. A brilliant gleam then appeared in his eyes. Time was of the essence, and since he was going to help the bloodline rise to prominence, he would do it in spectacular fashion. Mengru and the mastiff flew to the central continent of the Meng clan, and called back the bloodline members who had had no other choice but to follow the orders of the other 9 bloodlines. Meanwhile, the shocking deaths of all of the cultivators in the Sioux clan's various auxiliary headquarters had caused quite a stir among the Sioux clan's powerful experts in their ancestral mansion. Everyone was in a rage, and finally, an ancient voice echoed out from within the Sioux clan ancestral mansion. The bedraggled bloodline thinks it can recover its former glory. Find the culprit and execute him. If anyone gets in your way, execute them too. Don't forget that the old cripples there can't do anything to you. The voice crashed like lightning, causing colors to flash in the sky and the lands to quake. Instantly, dozens of beams of light shot out, followed by hundreds of other figures, all of which headed toward the location of Grandpa Ming's bloodline. The Sioux clan was so enraged with the bloodline that there was no need to speak words. They decided to attack immediately, and the murderous aura they emanated was incredibly intense. At the same time, back in the central ancestral mansion of the Ming clan, another enraged shout could be heard coming from the courtyard where Meng Hao had crushed the Tao-seeking cultivator's bones, turning him into a pile of mush. 3 old men could be seen there, their faces grim and their eyes burning with fury. Behind them were 10 other clan members, all radiating intense killing intent. "What gall," said one of the 3 old men. "Their bloodline is weak to the point of dissipating. Who needs them? Now they're just intentionally provoking calamity. Men, come with me, we're going to crush this rebellion immediately." With that, the old man flicked his sleeve and then flew up into the air, followed by numerous fellow clan members. All of them transformed into beams of colorful light that shot off in the direction of Grandpa Ming's bloodline. It took only a moment for vast proverbial winds to surge, giving rise to waves in the dead brackish water that was the declining Ming clan, and it was all because of Meng Hao. As those things occurred, Meng Hao sat cross-legged on a boulder in the bloodline mansion, surrounded by other members of the bloodline. They all looked very excited and were in the middle of practicing various breathing exercises. The vast majority were female, and as they practiced cultivation, their cultivation bases slowly improved. The person sitting closest to Meng Hao was a young man, the very same one he had just saved, Meng Han. He occasionally looked over at Meng Hao, his eyes filled with adoration and zeal. The truth was that he wasn't the only one. Virtually everyone in the mansion looked at Meng Hao in the same way. The zeal they felt burned in their eyes. They finally had hope. This person that they were looking at had a cultivation base vastly greater than theirs. After years and years, he was the first person to ever successfully enter the immortal realm. In the practice of cultivation, you must pass through the 4 realms: spirit, immortal, ancient, Tao. Each realm bestows you with different types of power and are all subdivided into smaller stages. It might seem complicated, but you must proceed forward one step at a time. The further along the path you tread, the more and more powerful you will become. The spirit realm is divided into the stages of Qi condensation, foundation establishment, core formation, nascent soul, spirit severing, Tao seeking, and immortal ascension. I can see that most of you are in the core formation stage. Not many of you are in the nascent soul stage, and it seems you have no spirit severing cultivators. Meng Hao spoke quietly, but his voice seemed to be filled with a strange power. As it echoed about the bloodline mansion, all of his bloodline relatives listened attentively. Some of his bloodline relatives couldn't hold back from pointing out, "Big bro Meng Chen, don't forget that Big Sis Kaior is in the spirit severing stage, and Big Sis Yun is too. Big Sis Hong is in Tao seeking." Meng Hao nodded and continued. Core formation focuses on forming an inner core. You can use that core to coalesce your own pure qi, which can be used to conceive your nascent soul. When I was in the core formation stage, I used the 5 elements as my foundation, making a 5 elements gold core, which then became my 5 elements nascent soul. The true meaning of spirit severing lies, not in the spirit but in the severing. There are 3 severings which are also Taos. 3 severings, 3 Taos. Afterward, you must seek answers inwardly to take the next step, Tao seeking. As far as immortal ascension is concerned, It is actually simple. None of you really need to worry about it. You can simply imitate your ancestors and become false immortals. Meng Hao's voice echoed out as he expounded upon the meaning of the spirit realm, explaining it in detail to his bloodline clan members. They listened as if intoxicated. Many areas which they had formerly found very confusing were now explained clearly. Furthermore, Meng Hao's explanation was far deeper and more profound than any explanation they had received in the past. Meng Hao's voice also contained that strange power, something that gradually caused a type of seed to appear within the bodies of his bloodline relatives. It was a Dao seed, not the bloodline of an all-heaven Dao immortal, but rather Meng Hao's accumulated enlightenment regarding cultivation, his experiences within the spirit realm. It was a spirit seed. Meng Hao had a foundation in the spirit realm that was as rare as a phoenix feather or a killing horn in the mountain and sea realm. It would be no exaggeration to say that his understanding of the spirit realm exceeded that of any other person. No one had accumulated so much in that realm, and no one had prepared more thoroughly to become a true immortal. He had shaken the entire ninth mountain and sea. Because of that, his understanding and his explanation carried profound, indescribable meaning for all of his fellow clan members. In addition to all that, the rich immortal qi in the area vastly exceeded normal spiritual energy. The result was that the majority of his bloodline relatives were all sinking deeper and deeper into enlightenment. Meng Hao's grandmother and granduncles stared in shock at what was happening, and then excitement began to build up on their faces. Meng Hao's two uncles had faces flushed with excitement, not only because of what was happening to all the members of the junior generation, but also because the immortal qi was helping them to revert from their crippled states. The three middle-aged women were experiencing something similar. Apparently, all of the bloodline relatives around Meng Hao were slowly transforming. Meng Hao looked around at everyone in their states of enlightenment, until finally his gaze came to fall upon the young man Meng Han, whom he had rescued from the Su clan. From what Meng Hao could tell, he had better latent talent than anyone else present, and although his cultivation base was merely in the core formation stage, he was clearly on the verge of a breakthrough. A smile broke out on Meng Hao's face. He was now confident that within a few short years, his grandfather's bloodline should be able to achieve grandeur once again, which caused excitement to stir within his heart. It was at this point that he suddenly looked up into the sky, and a cold gleam flickered in his eyes. He waved his right hand, causing a cloud of black pods to fly out from within his bag of holding. They immediately flew off into the distance, radiating murderous auras. As they flew along, popping sounds could be heard as they transformed into black imps, whose gaping maws were filled with razor-sharp teeth. "Eeeeee!" screamed the blackpod imps as they shot off into the distance. Currently, outside of the 30,000-meter area Meng Hao had already set aside, hundreds of cultivators were flying around, radiating murderous auras and killing intent. The dozen or so in the lead had cultivation bases in the ancient realm, although the strongest of the bunch was only in the mid-ancient realm. However, a group like this was not something to be underestimated, and comprised about half of the entire power base of the Su clan. About 30% of the group was in the immortal realm and the rest were in the spirit realm. After all, the Su clan was one of 8 subsidiary clans within the Ming clan, which meant that it would be impossible for them to reach a terrifyingly powerful level. Even still, they had many powerful cultivators. What they could see was a huge area filled with dense mist, and they could sense that within that mist was some invisible barrier. That barrier caused the eyes of the mid-ancient realm cultivator from the Su clan to widen. He gasped, and his heart began to pound. He had to ask himself if even he could breach that barrier, and as he looked closer, he realized that the mist inside was immortal qi, so much immortal qi. It's so dense it's manifested physically. It's like this area is another world, like an immortal world. But who could possibly do this? Although he was shocked, few of his fellow clan members noticed any of these clues, and their murderous aura boiled just as strongly as before. Tempers provoked, some of the Su clan cultivators began to shout out in rage. Anyone from the Meng clan in the area had better get out here right now. It all happened too quickly for the mid-ancient realm cultivator to stop, and his face flickered as, all of a sudden, a grating sound rang out from the mist. Eeeeee! Following the sound was a huge group of black-colored imps, moving as fast as lightning. Each one of those imps was radiating pressure equivalent to the mid-ancient realm. "It's run! Get out of here!" The mid-ancient realm cultivator's scalp was numb. Although he had never encountered these blackbot imps before, he could tell how terrifying they were, and it filled his heart with an indescribable sense of deadly crisis. He immediately fell back, to the shock of his fellow clan members. Unfortunately for them, they didn't react quickly enough, and were quickly pounced upon by the blackbot imps. Apparently, the imps had no inclination to possess any of these people. They simply bored into their bodies and began to chew them up. Miserable screams instantly began to ring out from the mouths of the Sioux clan cultivators. A huge commotion was underway as more than 100 out of the group of hundreds began to scream. Then their bodies exploded into clouds of gore and blood. As for the others present, their faces drained of blood, and they immediately began to flee. In the blink of an eye, the blackbot imps shot out from within the gore, vicious expressions on their faces as they went on the attack again. Miserable shrieks rang out as another 100 or so cultivators were slaughtered. The blackbot imps were like yamas from hell, out to collect lives. Not even the Sioux clan cultivators in the ancient realm were capable of fleeing. No matter how they tried to fight back, they ended up screaming, and their bodies withered rapidly as the blackbot imps scraped them clean from the inside out. The strongest of their number, the mid-ancient realm old man, bellowed in rage as he unleashed divine abilities and magical items to defend himself. However, it did no good. Soon, one of the blackbot imps bored into him. He screamed miserably and then exploded. The gory scene lasted for some time. Hundreds of cultivators died, and the air was awash with the reek of blood. As for the blackbot imps, they grinned cruelly and let out fearsome howls. Finally, they formed back together into a black cloud that vanished back into the mist. Expand. Nascent soul, nascent soul. The soul aspect is physical, and as for the nascent part of the term, it relates to the spiritual. Therefore, because what you are currently absorbing via breathing techniques is immortal qi, which far exceeds ordinary spiritual energy. Theoretically speaking, you should be able to pass through the nascent soul stage much more quickly. Meng Hao's voice was quiet as he continued to expound upon his understanding of the spirit realm. He had just used a vast quantity of immortal jade to create a huge area for the exclusive purpose of allowing these several dozen people to absorb immortal qi. In the entire mountain and sea realm, few people could accomplish such a thing. In fact, the only ones who could would be the mountain and sea lords. Even large sects who could afford it would not, primarily because it wouldn't be worth it. Sects always had numerous competing factions who were generally concerned with their own interests and thus wouldn't agree to such a huge expenditure. Meng Hao might love money and had always dreamed of being rich. However, sentiment and honor were important things to him, and no amount of money could be more valuable to him than family. Therefore, he didn't think twice about the pain that usually came with spending money. As long as his grandfather's bloodline could rise to prominence again, it would all be worth it. As he continued to deliver his sermon, there were some in the audience who experienced cultivation-based breakthroughs. At the same time, rumbling sounds could be heard. A strange gleam could be seen in Meng Hao's eyes, and he wore a slight smile as the blackbot imps came flying back. After circling around in the air a few times, they began to drop bags of holding down toward the ground. Soon, there were so many it seemed like it was raining. The women in the bloodline mansion stared with wide eyes as all of this happened. Meng Hao's expression was very somber as he looked back at all the women and continued to speak. You must all remember that we cultivators must never waste cultivation resources. If you venture out and see something but don't pick it up, then it's the same as losing it. That's our maxim, and the most important principle we must keep in our hearts. 1. The comments about picking something up or else losing it were originally told to Meng Hao by his mother in chapter 1167. He's reiterated similar words a few times since then. Don't waste money, don't live luxuriously. If you have a chance to profit, then don't miss out on a single spirit stone. The entire audience was completely focused on Meng Hao, eyes burning with zealous adoration. As soon as the women heard his words, they fixed them in their minds. Apparently, their personalities were even affected, and gradually, their eyes began to shine brightly. Meng Hao was pleased with the look he saw in their eyes, although he didn't take the time to think of what the consequences would be of having an entire group of people molded after himself. In any case, he truly felt that this group was becoming much more to his liking. As for the three old-timers, they were watching with wide eyes, as were Meng Hao's two uncles. This, said one of Meng Hao's granduncles. He's so much like little Lily, Meng Hao's grandmother said with a wry smile. After a moment of thought, she allowed things to continue on as they were. With him here, the Meng clan will definitely need to change things up a bit. Outside in the courtyard, Meng Hao waved his hand, sending the bags of holding flying out to hover in front of the other clan members, until each one had several. All right, you hang on to these bags of holding. I'm heading out for a bit to get you some more cultivation resources. With that, Meng Hao rose to his feet, took a step forward, and vanished. When he reappeared, he was out in the mists. The blackbot imps flew around him, looking very friendly. Meng Hao waved his sleeve to collect them up, then took another step, vanishing and reappearing high up in the sky. A cold gleam flickered in his eyes as he looked toward the center of the continent and the Sioux clan. He had originally planned to exterminate the entire clan, but then his grandmother had woken up, which had caused a slight delay. However, moments ago when the blackbot imps wiped out the cultivators outside the mist, Meng Hao had been watching closely. Anyone who has a beef with my grandfather's bloodline also has a beef with me, he said coolly. Then he transformed into a beam of light which shot rumbling off toward the Sioux clan. Deep in the heart of the Sioux clan's ancestral mansion, within a hidden chamber, a red-haired old man sat there cross-legged. Suddenly, his eyes opened, and he shivered. A terrible feeling had just risen up in his heart, as if a huge disaster were heading his way. His cultivation base was far beyond the great circle of the ancient realm, and was already half a step into the Tao realm. In fact, he could make his attempt to complete that step at any time. However, he was very similar to Guru Heavencloud, who Meng Hao had encountered in the asteroid field back in the Ninth Mountain and Sea, and didn't have the confidence to try to make the attempt. Therefore, it would really be less accurate to say that he could break through to the Tao realm whenever he wished, and more accurate to say that he could force his way into the Quasi-Tao realm at any moment. This man was Su Yushin, leader of the Sioux clan. His cultivation base was why he was the clan leader, and also the reason why the Sioux clan had been able to become a vassal clan and occupy one of the continents in the Ming clan. What's going on? Could it be that bloodline of the Ming clan? The red-haired old man's eyes flickered and he frowned. Impossible. That bloodline has declined to the point where it's almost gone. In fact, that's why I was stationed here, to keep an eye on them and to make sure that instead of being wiped out in an instant, they slowly fade away into nothing. In a few hundred years, that mission will be accomplished. After sitting there in thought for a moment, his face suddenly flickered. Without the slightest hesitation or forethought, the man crushed a jade slip and then vanished. The moment he vanished was the exact same moment that a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering boom caused everything to shake violently. An enormous hand was descending from above, fully 30,000 meters wide, so realistic you could see the palm lines on it. It descended with such incredible speed that flames burst out all over it, racing down to scorch the earth. As it descended, it caused numerous pagodas within the Sioux clan ancestral mansion to crumble under the pressure. Buildings collapsed, bursting into flames, and the cultivators in the Sioux clan ancestral mansion looked up in shock. It was as if doomsday had arrived for them. What is that? An ambush? That hand, who does it belong to? Heavens! The cultivators in the Sioux clan ancestral mansion were completely shocked and began to tremble from the explosive will of extermination which weighed down on them. In the blink of an eye, the hand slammed down onto the ancestral mansion, crushing countless buildings and sending a huge shockwave out in all directions. The lands quaked as if they were being struck by lightning, and the entire Sioux clan was instantly transformed into ruins, replaced by the image of an enormous handprint. Flames raged everywhere, burning everything to a pitch-black crisp. Despite all of that, there actually weren't very many cultivators who died. Meng Hao wasn't a cold-blooded killer, and based on the level of his cultivation base, the divine sense laced within the palm enabled him to detect exactly who within the Sioux clan harbored evil designs toward his grandfather's bloodline. Those hostile cultivators were all killed, causing blood-curdling screams to ring out from within the sea of flames. As for the other cultivators, the flames merely sealed their cultivation bases, but didn't harm them physically. The land still shook violently, though, and the enormous handprint in the ground was shocking to the extreme. Within the ruins that filled the palm print, the Sioux clan patriarch blurred back into existence. As soon as he did, he coughed up a massive mouthful of blood. Face ashen, he looked around at the surviving clan members and then at the ruins. Then he threw his head back and howled viciously. As he looked up, he could see Meng Hao floating there in the air, radiating intense coldness. Considering what he had done with a single palm strike, he was clearly a terrifying individual. The Sioux clan patriarch chuckled bitterly and asked, "Who are you?" At the same time, he didn't hesitate to begin a cultivation-based breakthrough. "I'm Meng Chen. Meng Hao replied coldly. Meng Hao didn't want to drag the Meng clan into his problems with the Heaven God Alliance, and therefore he chose not to use his identity as Meng Hao. The Su clan patriarch laughed bitterly. He didn't believe Meng Hao at all, but that didn't matter. His cultivation base shot up explosively, and clouds began to form in the air as Tao Realm heavenly tribulation began to descend. Meng Hao's eyes flickered in the face of the descending Tao Realm heavenly tribulation. He then waved his right index finger, which caused the air to distort and wave-like ripples to spread out. Gradually, the ripples transformed into an enormous wolf, completely domineering, which howled as it charged the Su clan patriarch. It was on him in the blink of an eye, before the heavenly tribulation could arrive. The Su clan patriarch fought back viciously, but couldn't stop himself from being swallowed up in a single gulp by the gigantic wolf. The heavenly tribulation, having lost its target, immediately began to fade away, and the path which had appeared vanished. Meng Hao waved his sleeve. Ignoring everything down below, he turned and vanished. Time passed. Around evening, more beams of light appeared above the lands near Meng Hao's grandfather's bloodline. These people looked different than the Su clan cultivators, and were in fact from the Meng clan. They were from the 7th of the 9 bloodlines of the Meng clan, which was a powerful group. However, only a few of their number had come. One was in the great circle of the ancient realm, one in the late ancient realm, 2 in the mid-ancient realm, 4 in the early ancient realm, and several dozen were immortals. A force like that was a powerful one indeed. Unless a Tao realm expert showed up, they could wage an entire war on their own. Currently, the old man in the lead was flying along, enraged and bursting with killing intent. As the group flew along, colors flashed in the sky and the wind screamed. Suddenly, the old man's furious voice could be heard ringing out. Su Yushan, get out here right now. The booming voice echoed back and forth, making it sound almost like numerous voices were shouting. A huge wind blasted across the lands, sweeping away the clouds in the sky and shaking everything. The old man hovered in midair arrogantly. In his view, the ideal way of handling this situation was to call out the leader of the vassal clan that was guarding this place, and have him extinguish the rebellious bloodline that was on its last legs. Chapter 1258, Exterminating the Su clan. Chapter 1259, Imposing Grandma Meng. The old man's voice rang out in all directions, and yet no response could be heard, causing him to frown. He sent his divine sense out, and when it reached the Su clan ancestral mansion at the center of the continent, a tremor ran through him, and he gasped, an expression of intense disbelief filling his face. This, he immediately shot off through the air. Behind him, the other members of the Meng clan slowly began to reveal their own shock as the ancient realm cultivators sent their divine sense out and realized what had happened. Dozens of them shot through the air toward the Su clan, where the old man in the leadership position was hovering in midair above the ancestral mansion, looking down at the enormous palm print and the ruins that filled it. After a moment, he closed his eyes as he focused on sensing the area. Then his eyes snapped open. The aura of Tao tribulation appeared here, but I didn't sense any tribulation earlier. That indicates that the tribulation vanished before it even started. It also means that Su Yushan was killed before his cultivation base broke through. Other than a Tao realm expert, the only other person who could do something like that would be a quasi-Tao cultivator. The old man took a deep breath and scanned the ruins. Then he waved his hand, causing one of the living Su clan cultivators to fly up into the air. The old man didn't ask any questions. He was the type of person who didn't trust what people told him with regard to important matters like this. He only trusted his own soul-searching. It took but a brief moment before he saw Meng Hao and the enormous palm destroying the Su clan. Then, he heard Meng Hao call himself Meng Chen. Meng Chen. The old man's eyes went wide and he began to breathe heavily. Actually, the reason he had rushed over here in such domineering fashion was because of Meng Chen. Now that he understood the terrifying nature of the person he had come for, the old man began to shiver. Knowing that he had narrowly avoided certain calamity, the old man immediately turned to leave. The other members of the Meng clan were looking around in shock. Then they noticed the old man leaving, and they began to ask questions. "Elder, where are we going now?" "Where else?" replied the flustered old man. "Home. We're going home immediately." The old man couldn't help but look back at the palm-shaped crater once more. He shivered, already petrified of Meng Chen, even though he had never even seen him face to face. Based on what he knew about Meng Chen, he was sure that this terrifying cultivation base could not belong to him. In his judgment, Meng Chen had most likely been possessed or replaced, or something of the like. In either case, he himself didn't qualify to tangle with whoever Meng Chen really was. A person with a cultivation base like that could kill him as easily as flipping over his hand. Someone such as that was a person he couldn't afford to provoke, and thus, it was without any further hesitation that he sped off as fast as possible. The other cultivators exchanged dismayed glances, then hurried to leave. The old man's sudden flight was just now beginning to fill their hearts with fear. Feeling as if some hidden force were behind them about to attack, they started going faster and faster until they were fleeing at top speed. The group had burst onto the scene with a towering murderous aura, and yet before they had even seen Meng Hao with their own eyes, they fled, crestfallen and terrified. As they left, Meng Hao was sitting cross-legged in the Bloodline mansion, watching them hurry off, a cold smile on his face. Their quick reaction had saved them. Had they dared show any evil designs, he wouldn't have hesitated to wipe out their entire bloodline. Regarding the matter of wiping out bloodlines, Meng Hao had already consulted with his grandmother and granduncles. According to them, the third, fourth, and fifth bloodlines were important, but as for the other five, they could be done away with at will. Seeing the complicated expressions in the old-timer's eyes, Meng Hao had simply said, "I'll handle things, but let's wait until your cultivation bases are recovered before deciding exactly how." Time passed. Meng Hao gave sermons on the Tao, but spent most of his time using his own cultivation base to assist his grandmother and the others in their recovery. The more he understood about the framework created by the 9 needles, the more he realized that they couldn't be removed casually, not without risking the lives of the people who were affected. He needed more time to fully understand them, and his grandmother and the others also needed more time to strengthen their bodies. Only then could further action be taken. One afternoon a few days later, as Meng Hao was giving a sermon on the Tao, he suddenly stopped talking and looked up. A blood-colored light could be seen up in the air, which was the mastiff. On its back could be seen Meng Ru, as well as about 10 other young women. Some of those women looked excited, others appeared to be torn, and some were confused. Their return instantly caused a big commotion in the mansion. As for the young women, when they sensed the immortal qi, they were astonished. Meng Ru immediately found Meng Hao, clasped hands and bowed. She looked a bit sad and even hesitant, as if she weren't sure of how to express herself. After a long moment, she gritted her teeth and began to speak. "Big bro Meng Chen, I wasn't able to bring everyone back. There were, 3 sisters who chose to stay with their masters. There were also 2 whose masters refused to free them. I was worried about making a mistake, so I didn't dare to ask Big Bro Mastiff to attack." Apparently, Meng Ru felt a lot of respect toward the Mastiff and actually viewed it as a cultivator and not an animal. 3 of them refused to return, Meng Hao asked calmly. He wasn't too surprised about this. There weren't many people left in his grandfather's bloodline, so it was only natural that there would be some people who didn't wish to remain and would try to strike out on their own. It was at this point that the door suddenly opened, and Grandma Meng walked out without a single person supporting her. "Since they chose not to return, then they shall remain cut off for all eternity." All of the Bloodline clan members present immediately bowed their heads respectfully. Meng Hao quickly rose to his feet and clasped hands. "Chenner," Grandma Meng said calmly, "go bring back the final 2 who were prevented from returning." After her recent days of recuperation, she was in much better spirits than before, and her eyes glittered with determination. She had long since become the pillar of the bloodline, and it had only been when her body had begun to weaken that she had begun to lose control. Now that she had recovered, she once again radiated the air of a family leader. Furthermore, she was aware of the situation between Meng Hao and the Heaven God Alliance, and was also wary of getting the clan involved. Therefore, she declined to address him as Hayar, and instead used Meng Chen's name. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. Seeing his grandmother like this left him feeling quite relieved. At the very least, with her back in control of the bloodline, the task of helping it rise to prominence didn't fall on his shoulders alone. "What if I meet opposition?" Meng Hao asked. "Kill them," Grandma Meng replied immediately. Although her words were not spoken loudly, they resounded like thunder in the ears of all present. At the same time, a murderous aura began to radiate from her, something which had remained buried inside of her for too long. "We've been away for too long," said another voice. "It's time to remind the Meng clan who exactly we are." Meng Hao's 2 granduncles emerged from the room. They were no longer confined to their chairs, and although they looked very weak, they were clearly in much better condition than before. All of the surrounding bloodline clan members, were now looking excitedly at Grandma Meng. "Your command shall be carried out," Meng Hao said, clasping hands and bowing. Then he turned, leaving the Mastiff to protect the Bloodline clan members, but taking Meng Ru with him. A moment later, the two of them had vanished. Grandma Meng and Meng Hao's two granduncles watched them leave, and their eyes burned with faith and anticipation for the future. Even as Meng Hao was working hard to help his grandfather's bloodline rise to prominence, someone appeared in the starry sky of the 8th mountain and sea. It was a handsome young man who strolled along wearing a violet robe. He was currently looking off into the distance at the Meng clan. "I can sense that you're there," the young man said, smiling. He was none other than Jade Dingyang. Meanwhile, a huge turtle was floating in another part of the starry sky of the 8th mountain and sea, snoring as he napped. On his back was a huge continent, filled with all forms of life. Suddenly, the turtle's eyes snapped open as he awoke from slumber. His eyes shone like bright lanterns as he looked out into the darkness of the starry sky. "Damn it, I just had a nightmare," the turtle muttered. "I dreamed about that little bastard Meng Hao tracking me down in the 8th mountain and sea. Ha ha ha, what a hilarious dream. It's totally impossible. There's no way that little punk could find me here. Damn it, why would I have a dream like that? It's a bad sign, an ill omen. I can't believe I dreamed about being his mount." That huge turtle was none other than Patriarch Reliance, who truly was frightened of Meng Hao. He let out a roar, then glanced around shiftily for a moment. Then he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. Strangely, there appeared to be mysterious figures nearby Patriarch Reliance, figures he didn't notice, who were apparently keeping track of his current location. Something else was happening at around this same time in the 7th mountain and sea. All of the sects there, as well as all the clans, were mobilizing. Gradually, an enormous military force was being organized, virtually without number. In the lead position of that enormous army floated a sizable mountain peak, the very tip of which emanated powerful ripples. Just barely visible on that mountain peak was a person sitting cross-legged, looking toward the 8th mountain, eyes gleaming. The figure then began to speak softly in an ancient voice. "I don't really want this war, but there's no choice in the matter. It is my mission. Perhaps I'm not the only one either. It's not a betrayal. After all, there is nothing to betray. And yet, why do I feel so much pain in my heart?" The terrifying army was filled with millions upon millions of cultivators, organized in formation so that they resembled an ancient, enormous dragon. They radiated intense murderous auras as they began to march closer and closer to the 8th mountain and sea. Chapter 1260, What is the point of leaving any behind? As the army from the 7th mountain and sea was picking up speed, Meng Hao was back in the 8th mountain and sea. He was also being tracked by shadowy figures who occasionally materialized and then vanished. Apparently, they were watching him and keeping track of his location. There had not been any wars between the mountains and seas for many years, but it seemed one was about to break out now. There were even various entities above in the 33 heavens who were using special techniques to observe the mountain and sea realm without being detected. They were looking down at the 8th mountain and sea, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. Meanwhile, outside of the 33 heavens, out in the boundless expanse, two forces were approaching from different directions, and they were growing inexorably closer. Apparently war was nigh. Meng Hao and Meng Ru were speeding along through midair when all of a sudden, an intense feeling of alarm rose up inside Meng Hao, causing his face to flicker. Before he could react, the parrot's shrill voice could suddenly be heard in his mind. "They're coming, coming, I tell you, they're close, I can sense them. Damn it, they're moving a lot faster than I anticipated. Meng Hao, they're almost here." The parrot sounded anxious, even terrified. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He knew exactly who the parrot was talking about, and it caused him to slowly lift his head up to look up into the sky. It was almost as if he could see out into the vast expanse beyond the 33 heavens. "Well then, I guess I need to hurry up," he said softly. Off to the side, Meng Ru gaped in shock. "Big bro Meng Chen, what did you say?" "Oh, nothing," he replied, shaking his head as he continued to lead Meng Ru through the starry sky toward the Meng clan's central continent. He passed through the protective spell formations without triggering any of them, and proceeded directly toward the ancestral mansion. "The two sisters were going after our big sis Kior and big sis Meng Fei," Meng Ru said quietly. "Their latent talent is better than mine, and their cultivation bases are higher. I managed to meet them and pass the news about what was happening, but I was prevented from taking them away. If it weren't for Big Bro Mastiff, I might have been detained as well. They're both in the hands of cultivators from the first bloodline." When she looked at Meng Hao, it was almost worshipfully. In her mind, once Meng Chen arrived on the scene, all their problems would be solved. Meanwhile, in the East District of the Meng clan's ancestral mansion, there was a huge temple surrounded by 9 pillars. Beneath each of those pillars was a furnace. Those burning furnaces were causing the 9 pillars to slowly heat up. Bound to the pillars were 9 young women, all of whom had ashen faces and were trembling. They looked terrified and were pleading for their lives, except for 2 who, although they were not spectacularly beautiful, were charming and pretty. Those 2 had their jaws clenched. Despite the increasing temperature of the pillars they were tied to, they refused to utter any pleading words. Sitting in the middle of the pillars and furnaces was an old man, who was currently performing double-handed incantation gestures and sending sealing marks out toward the furnaces, which were causing the furnaces to burn even more fiercely. Surrounding the entire area was an audience of young men. The audience was clearly split into 2 groups, one of which clustered around a young man in a green robes, and the second group around another young man in a yellow robe. Clearly, the 2 of them had very high statuses, and currently, their eyes were fixed upon the old man in the middle of all the columns. They were also turning deaf ears to the pleading cries of the young women. After a moment passed, the young man in the green robe suddenly asked, "What are we betting on this time?" "I bet that this time, Grandmaster Song's pill refining will result in her and her all becoming young beauty pills." As the young man in the yellow robe spoke, his eyes glittered as he singled out 3 young women among the 9. 2 of those young women were those who refused to plead for their lives. After a moment of thought, the young man in the green robe replied, "You made your choice pretty quickly. Well, in that case, I say that those 3 will fail to become pills." Then the 2 young men exchanged an icy glance. It was at about this time that rumbling sounds could be heard as Grandmaster Song's eyes suddenly flared with light. He waved both hands forcefully out into the air, causing the 9 furnaces to blaze with fire. The pillars instantly grew hotter, and in the blink of an eye 9 flaming threads shot out of the fires toward the 9 young women. Terrified screams of desperation rang out from the mouths of 7 of the young women. As for the other 2, they were trembling and clearly terrified, but still refused to make even a single sound. However, their hearts were clearly filled with regret. When Meng Ru had told them about what was happening back in their bloodline mansion, they had instantly wanted to return, but now, it seemed that would be impossible. Sighing inwardly, they exchanged glances, then slowly closed their eyes as the flaming threads closed in on them. "Become pills!" Grandmaster Song threw his head back and roared, rising to his feet and throwing his hands into the air. Strange light shone out from his eyes, and yet, even as the words left his mouth, an enraged snort suddenly echoed through the air like thunder. Cold words also rang out, "You're the one who should become a pill." As the icy words reverberated back and forth, cracking sounds could be heard as the ground froze over. The 9 furnaces trembled and their flames winked out. Next, the furnaces actually exploded, and cracks began to spread out across the pillars, which then shattered. The 9 young women could now move. As soon as their feet touched the ground, they began to flee, except for the 2 who had refused to beg for their lives, who looked up into the air, excited expressions on their faces. The crimson threads attached to the columns almost seemed to be self-aware, and were trying to flee in fear. However, before they could get very far, a powerful force sucked them back, twisting them together into what looked like a white medicinal pill, which came to rest in the hand of a young man who had suddenly appeared in the air up above. He waved his arm, sending the white medicinal pill flying toward Grandmaster Song's forehead. As it flew through the air, it crumbled, then fused into Grandmaster Song, who trembled and let out a miserable shriek. His body instantly burst into flames and was burned into ash, all the way to the bone. What was left behind was a red medicinal pill. The young man who had just arrived was none other than Meng Hao, followed by Meng Ru. Meng Ru was staring at the 2 steadfast young women, tears pouring down her cheeks. She quickly flew over and stood in front of them protectively. This sudden development left all the bystanders completely shocked. As they edged backward, the 2 young men's faces darkened. "What gall, how dare you kill Grandmaster Song? Men, kill these people. Bring me his head." In response to their orders, the crowd of cultivators surrounding them flew into the air toward Meng Hao. "What kind of clan are you?" Meng Hao said quietly, his eyes blazing with icy killing intent. "Refining people into pills for pleasure, you completely lack any humanity whatsoever. What is the point of leaving any of you behind?" Note from Urgent: I wrote this chapter in the car and ended up getting carsick. I feel horrible but did my best and can't write anymore. Please forgive me. This chapter is only 2,000 Chinese characters instead of 3,000. Note from Deathblade. This chapter is indeed much shorter, coming in at about 1,300 English words instead of the usual 2,000 plus. Chapter 1261, One Option, Amputate. Meng Hao's eyes were as cold as ice, but inwardly he was sighing. For a clan to decline in power was acceptable, but for the morals of its people to degenerate was sickening. Leaving them alive was truly pointless. By means of illustration, you could say that his grandfather's bloodline had fallen into dire straits and was now at a point of extreme weakness, consisting of the elderly, the frail, the ill, and the crippled. The younger generation was forced into servitude, and the older generation was sick and decrepit. However, its soul was still present and the heart was strong. They still stuck together like a family, and as such, would one day be able to rise to prominence again. It was possible to sense that spirit within Meng Ru, Meng Chen, and the other two young women from just now. They all clung stubbornly to their hope for the future. However, when it came to the rest of the so-called Meng clan, Meng Hao felt quite disappointed. Even scum like these can be called young lords. Meng Hao shook his head. During his entire life, starting in the 9th Mountain and Sea, and then in his short time in the 8th Mountain and Sea, he had seen all sorts of chosen, including young lords and sect princes. However, he had never seen people like he was seeing now in the Meng clan. When dealing with such malignant rot, there's only one option: amputate. Meng Hao's eyes flickered with killing intent as the Meng clan cultivators attacked him. He waved his right finger, causing rumbling to fill the air and ripples to spread out in all directions. The ripples filled the area in the blink of an eye, and any cultivators they touched, regardless of their cultivation base, instantly exploded into ash. The ripples spread, shaking everything, turning everything into dust. The two incredulous young lords didn't even qualify to try to flee. In the briefest of moments, they were inundated by the ripples. Of course, life-saving magic flared to life in the form of shields as they tried to defend against the ripples. However, they were completely useless. All they did was to buy a few breaths worth of time. Then the shields collapsed. The eyes of the two young men widened with disbelief, and then bangs could be heard as they were transformed into ash as well. All of the cultivators behind them were also transformed into dust. Soon the only people left were Meng Hao, the Meng clan girls, and the other young women. Everyone else was gone. Everything happened so quickly that the young women could only gape in astonishment and stand there trembling and panting. As for Meng Ru, even if she were a stupid person who knew little about the immortal realm, she would still be able to understand that the power unleashed by Meng Chen just now was definitely not that of an immortal. As for the other two young women from the same bloodline, their eyes were even wider. Their cultivation bases were significantly higher than Meng Ru's, so they could pick up on even more of the clues. They looked over at Meng Hao, trembling with awe and reverence. Meng Ru hesitated for a moment and then said, "Big bro Meng Chen, you." Before she could finish, one of her older cousins held out a hand to stop her from speaking. Meng Hao looked at the three young women and nodded, his gaze gentle. Then he looked off into the distance, and once again his expression turned icy and somber. Suddenly, a powerful aura began to roll out from him, filling the area, causing the sky to dim and the lands to quake. The surrounding buildings and structures seemed incapable of withstanding the pressure, and soon creaking sounds could be heard. Then the creaking turned into rumbling as one building after another began to collapse. It was at this point that, from two different locations, a group of a few dozen beams of bright light each began to shoot toward them from off in the distance. Roaring shouts echoed out, filled with fury and killing intent. "Who are you that dares to get out of line in the Meng clan? Are you looking to die?" The two enraged shouts echoed out like thunder, causing two powerful shockwaves to speed toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao stood there looking coldly at the incoming cultivators. The highest cultivation base among them was merely in the great circle of the ancient realm, and the others were far from that. "You people don't even bother to determine who is in the right and who is in the wrong," he said coolly. "Leaving you alive would also be pointless." He took a step forward, vanishing. When he reappeared, he was right in front of the lead cultivator, a middle-aged man in extravagant clothing. The man's eyes were red with rage, but the instant Meng Hao appeared in front of him, he began to shake, and his anger instantly faded half away into shock. He had no idea what sort of technique Meng Hao had used to vanish and then reappear, but that was actually of secondary importance. Most important was the fact that he could sense a boundless power radiating off of Meng Hao. In fact, it was far more intense than the pressure that he would feel when standing in front of a patriarch. The man gasped and blurted, "You." The killing intent in Meng Hao's eyes caused the man's scalp to tingle so hard it felt like it would explode. He began to fall back, looking completely shocked by the terrifying power he sensed. "You're too slow," Meng Hao said, shaking his head and simultaneously waving his sleeve. A massive tempest sprang out, transforming into a tornado that connected the sky and the land. It was so conspicuous that anyone in the Meng clan would be able to see it. It swept toward the middle-aged man and the cultivators behind him, moving with such incredible speed that they were incapable of fleeing. They struggled and fought back, but it only took a moment for the tornado to sweep over them, after which miserable screams rang out. It was as if a gigantic hand were using a huge brush to paint the entire tornado bright red. The entire Meng clan was completely shaken. Numerous cultivators were pulled out of their meditative trances, and after looking up, many of them immediately shot up into the air with expressions of astonishment on their faces. An ambush. Another clan is invading. An enemy clan is attacking. Damn it, why didn't the clan's grand spell formation activate? Cries of alarm spread out, and the entire clan began to stir. There were also 9 figures who began to fly toward the tornado from 9 different directions. They were followed by even more figures, and as their cultivation base power surged out, it transformed into a spell formation. Instead of flying directly to the tornado, they began to circle around it. Soon colors flashed in the sky as the cultivators formed a massive vortex which thoroughly enveloped the area where Meng Hao was standing. Meng Ru was trembling in shock, as were the other 2 young Meng clan women. As for Meng Hao, he looked down at them from up in the air and smiled slightly. That smile seemed to contain the power to completely ease their hearts, and the fear the 3 young women felt instantly faded away. Meng Hao turned, completely ignoring the 9 cultivators leading the formation, and all the others who were following them. Meng Hao looked off into the distance at one particular cultivator who had stopped in place and wasn't moving. He was an old man, and when Meng Hao's gaze fell upon him, he gasped and began to tremble, then started to back up. Even as he took a step back, though, Meng Hao waved his hand. A second tornado sprang into being, sweeping through the crowds toward the old man, provoking numerous blood-curdling screams. The old man had a powerful cultivation base, but it didn't matter, nor did it matter what divine abilities and magical items he unleashed. He was still consumed by the wind. Moments later, the second tornado was also stained blood red. Meng Hao hovered in midair, looking around coldly. The 2 tornadoes whipped nearby, and if you looked at them long enough, it almost seemed as if 2 vicious wolves were lurking inside of them, peering out voraciously. "Let's go," Meng Hao said calmly. He would not wipe out entire bloodlines this day. He would simply comply with Grandma Ming's orders to bring the girls back. Furthermore, he could sense that, although the clan's defensive spell formation hadn't been activated originally, the slaughter he had just carried out was causing rumbling sounds to rise up. There were also ripples beginning to spread, and within them, Meng Hao could sense a terrifying power. That power was definitely the Meng clan's grand defensive spell formation. As soon as Meng Hao spoke, he took a step forward, and the 3 young women followed him anxiously. Before they could get very far, though, 9 beams of light began to close in on them. "Don't even dream about leaving," roared one of the 9. In response, Meng Hao looked back at the man. This man was a clan elder with a cultivation base in the great circle of the ancient realm, very close to the Dao realm. However, he suddenly stopped in place as though a powerful hand had clasped him by the throat. Face flickering with shock, he fell back, then turned ashen as he coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. One gaze seriously injured an elder, which caused everyone else to gasp. They could sense how terrifying Meng Hao was, but they could never have imagined that he was this terrifying. Dao realm," whispered the elder in a shaky voice. Completely ignoring the 9 cultivators, Meng Hao continued on his way, followed by Meng Ru and the other 2 young women who were incredibly excited. When they looked at Meng Hao, it was with complete enthusiasm and ardor. To them, Meng Hao was a towering mountain of their bloodline, someone who no amount of wind or rain could ever budge. The 9 cultivators didn't dare to try to stop him. The massive vortex spell formation also stopped in place, and the cultivators who were powering it parted to make a path for Meng Hao, looks of astonishment on their faces. As for Meng Hao, his expression was calm as he proceeded through. Everything was extremely quiet. On the ground, numerous members of the Meng clan stood outside of their houses and other buildings, looking up into the sky at what was happening, completely shocked. Mengda was there in a temple, looking up at Meng Hao with an expression of utter disbelief. In another location in the Meng clan, there were 3 other young women who were now looking at Meng Hao, Meng Ru, and the other young women of the bloodlines. These other 3 had complex expressions on their faces, and they almost looked as if they were being stabbed in the heart. They were the bloodline relatives who had chosen not to return, and had instead opted to remain as servants to other clan members. They had forsaken their bloodline, and therefore their bloodline had cast them off. It was at this point that, all of a sudden, an intense light exploded out from the enormous statue in the middle of the Meng clan ancestral mansion. "State your name." /expand. As the voice echoed out, the light shining out from the statue transformed into pressure that spread out, then converged onto Meng Hao. Rumbling filled the air, colors flashed, wind screamed. As Tao realm pressure descended from above, natural laws retreated and dissipated, until the only thing present was the Tao realm pressure. The members of the Meng clan looked on with wide eyes. The 9 cultivators in the great circle of the ancient realm clasped hands and bowed deeply. "Greetings, Patriarch." The cultivators in the vortex did the same, excited expressions on their faces. "Greetings, Patriarch." Down below, all of the Meng clan cultivators who had stepped out of the various houses and buildings, even the servants and cultivators with other surnames, all bowed deeply and joined their voices to cry out, "Greetings, Patriarch." Meng Ru and the other girls' faces fell. They might have complete trust in Meng Hao, but deep down inside, any patriarch represented the most supreme and paramount power of the clan, and they were existences that were so far above them that even if they gazed upwards, they would never be able to catch a glimpse of one. The entire Meng clan was completely shaken. Within that enormous statue were 9 hidden chambers, 4 of which were empty. The other 5 were occupied by cultivators sitting cross-legged in meditation. The person who had just spoken was the figure in the 8th chamber, who now sat there with eyes open and a serious look on his face. He was not the patriarch from the 9th bloodline, the one that Meng Hao had previously encountered face to face. This was the patriarch of the 8th bloodline. Considering that the cultivators who had just been killed were members of his bloodline, he had no choice but to make an appearance. Meng Hao stopped in place and turned to look at the statue behind him, without even sparing a glance at the heaven-shaking, earth-shattering pressure descending toward him. Then he began to speak, his voice cool. The words he uttered were the type that anyone would think were wildly egotistical and arrogant. "I bet you don't even have the balls to try and fight me." His voice was calm, but echoed out in all directions, instantly arousing the ire of the other members of the Meng clan. "What incredible gall! Are you looking to die? You overestimate yourself." Numerous shouts of rage echoed out within the central continent. The cultivators of the Meng clan had to admit that Meng Hao was powerful to a terrifying degree. But in their minds, if he tried to fight one of their patriarchs, he would be defeated with a single blow. That was the type of faith exercised in the clan patriarchs by all clan members, both young and old. Even Meng Ru and the other 2 young women were extremely nervous as they stood there next to Meng Hao, and the panic was visible on their faces. In sharp contrast to all that was the object of the clan members' veneration, the patriarch sitting there in the 8th chamber, whose expression changed drastically. At the same time that Meng Hao spoke, the patriarch was able to detect fluctuations that only someone in the Tao realm would be able to feel. Those fluctuations filled the patriarch with a sense of intense terror, and he knew that even if he went all out with every scrap of power he could muster, it wouldn't do any good. The sensation he got was that he was like a tiny firefly, and Meng Hao was a burning torch. "Impossible? What cultivation base does he have?" The old man's eyes were wide. Moments ago, he had been on the verge of stepping out in person, but now he was hesitating. In the end, he didn't dare to emerge and, in fact, couldn't even think of words to say in response. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he looked coolly at the statue for a moment before turning and heading off with Meng Ru and the other young women. The only reason he was backing down was because he didn't feel like making complete enemies of everyone in the Meng clan. This is the Meng clan after all, he thought. Once Grandma Meng's cultivation base is restored, she can decide what to do. He wouldn't exceed his authority in this matter. Even if his mother was a member of the Meng clan, he himself was a young lord of the Fang clan. There were certain things he could do if he wished, but he had to do them very carefully. Even if he had good intentions, if he went too far it could lead to misunderstandings, which he didn't want to happen. That was why, after a bit of thought, Meng Hao decided to just back down. Behind him, The various cultivators of the Ming clan followed after him and stared at him murderously, even mockingly. However, their expressions of outrage quickly began to die down, until in the end, not a sound could be heard. These Ming clan cultivators' faces flickered with bewilderment, and there were even some faces that went deathly pale with astonishment. That was because, unexpectedly, after Meng Hao spoke, their patriarch didn't respond at all. It even seemed like his aura had gotten much weaker. It was as if Meng Hao had been completely correct about their patriarch. He didn't dare to show his face and fight. That fact caused the minds of numerous members of the Ming clan to reel in shock. As for the cultivators in the great circle of the ancient realm, waves of astonishment battered their minds. Earlier, they had suspected that Meng Hao was in the Dao realm, but now, there didn't seem to be any need for speculation. Apparently, this young man really was in the Dao realm. He really is. In the Dao realm. Gasps could be heard from among the cultivators in the great circle of the ancient realm as they watched Meng Hao leaving. Meanwhile, the patriarch in the eighth chamber of the statue gritted his teeth. At the same time, he could sense that the patriarchs in the ninth and first chambers were also awake, and yet were doing nothing. Damn it, they want me to probe this guy's abilities, huh? A gleam of determination could be seen in the eyes of the eighth patriarch. No person could reach the Dao realm if they lacked courage. If they did, how could they possibly have passed the Dao realm tribulation? With the clan spell formation, I can give it a shot, he said, gritting his teeth. Suddenly, his cultivation base erupted with power, sending the fluctuations of a one-essence Dao realm expert shooting out from within the statue. The other members of the Ming clan saw golden light shining out, which became a golden ocean then that transformed into an enormous hand, stretching out toward Meng Hao. Colors flashed as the golden hand filled the sky, casting shadow over all the lands beneath. Rumbling filled the air as boundless power bore down on Meng Hao. Even as the faces of Meng Ru and the other young women went pale, Meng Hao turned, and his eyes flashed with icy coldness. "So you do have some balls," he said coolly. He did nothing to avoid the incoming golden hand and in fact leapt up toward it. Then he slammed into it bodily and with complete disregard. Massive rumbling could be heard as the golden hand tried to crush him, and yet, as soon as it touched him, it began to tremble and then collapsed into pieces. As the hand shattered, the golden ocean disintegrated. Apparently, a Dao realm attack couldn't stand up to a single move by Meng Hao. When the hand collapsed, the old man in the eighth chamber of the statue trembled and then coughed up a mouthful of blood as he was sent flying backward out of control. A moment later, he appeared outside the statue, where he coughed up another massive mouthful of blood. Face pale white, he stared at Meng Hao in complete terror and astonishment. Dao Lord, Dao Sovereign. Intense fear pounded within the heart of the patriarch of the eighth bloodline. Equally shaken was the patriarch of the ninth bloodline. He recognized Meng Hao from their earlier meeting, and to see him fighting at this level was completely and utterly shocking. They were shocked, but as for the rest of the members of the Ming clan, they were utterly dumbfounded. Their jaws dropped as they saw their patriarch coughing up blood, whereas Meng Hao was standing there with a completely calm face. All he had done was take a step forward. That single step caused a Dao realm expert to fall into retreat and to be injured. The faith of the Meng clan cultivators in their patriarch was completely toppled. All faces were completely gray and ashen. Within the crowd was the young man Mengde, who had been watching all along and had instantly recognized Meng Hao. His eyes were wide with shock as he watched everything play out. Other than the gasps, there was no sound at all. Meng Hao looked over indifferently at the wounded patriarch of the eighth bloodline. However, it was at this point that the patriarch's eyes turned crimson. He suddenly threw his head back and howled, then slapped his forehead viciously with his right hand. A boom rang out and the sky went dim. Suddenly, a massive pressure radiated out from the enormous statue. In the blink of an eye, it had filled the area, and although no one in the audience could see anything out of the ordinary, Meng Hao was able to clearly see the shield which had sprung up. Defensive spell formation, he thought. However, he didn't back up. Instead, he stood in place, eyes flickering as the shield expanded out toward him and then clashed with him briefly. That brief clash caused Meng Hao's pupils to constrict slightly. He could sense a heaven-destroying, earth-extinguishing power in that shield, something that he couldn't resist for very long with only his fleshly body power. This defensive spell formation could actually be even more powerful. It's strong enough with one person controlling it, but with more people backing it, I would actually be in significant danger. After sensing the power of the shield, Meng Hao decided not to fight it. Instead, he turned, flicking his sleeve as he took Meng Ru and the other young women away, vanishing off into the distance. As Meng Hao left, the patriarch of the 8th bloodline watched him go, his expression unsightly. The fact that Meng Hao had been able to stand up to the attack of the spell formation was completely shocking. I can't believe that he stood up to the ancestral spell formation and wasn't even hurt. Just what realm is he in? He's not a Dao Lord, could it be? Could it be that he really is a Dao sovereign? But that's impossible. Back in the statue, the patriarchs in the 1st and 9th chambers had very serious expressions on their faces, especially the patriarch from the 1st bloodline. The 10th bloodline, he murmured quietly, face grim. Chapter 1262, Activating the Clan Defense Formation. /expand. Of course, Meng Hao was not a Dao sovereign, nor was he equivalent to such a level. However, if he unleashed his full battle prowess, he could fight any Dao realm cultivator under the level of a Dao sovereign. That had to do with this fleshly body, his paragon magic, and most importantly, the fact that he was an all-heaven Dao immortal. Because of that, despite the fact that he was merely an immortal, he could still shake the Dao realm. Soon all 4 nirvana fruits will be fully fused. When they become my Dao fruit, they can help me push open the door of the ancient realm and extinguish my soul lamps. The only thing I'm not sure about is exactly how many soul lamps I'll end up with. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed with anticipation. Considering that he could already fight the Dao realm, in his view the ancient realm was merely a stepping stone. He hadn't even considered the possibility of failing, and as far as he was concerned, the ancient realm wasn't even very important. Of course, before Meng Hao, it had been a very, very long time since any all-heaven Dao immortal had appeared. Virtually no one knew how difficult it was for someone like him to step into the ancient realm. Meng Hao, being able to sense that his 4th nirvana fruit was nearing a state of complete absorption, was incredibly excited. Currently, he was whistling through the air with Meng Ru and the other young women in tow as he headed back toward the continent where their bloodline waited. Soon they were back. When the 2 young women who had just been saved saw how different everything was, they became very excited. Meng Hao went to see his grandmother and granduncles. After he told his grandmother about what had happened when he had rescued the 2 young women, she asked, "Hey how confident are you that you can fully heal our injuries?" All 3 of the old-timers looked at Meng Hao as they waited for his answer. He thought for a moment, then looked up and replied, "I wouldn't dare to say 100% confident, perhaps 80%. In response to his words, his grandmother began to breathe heavily, and his 2 granduncles began to tremble. All 3 of them exchanged glances and then nodded. "Hey use whatever techniques you can. It doesn't matter how dangerous the process is, we're willing to risk it." Meng Hao took a deep breath, then nodded seriously. He had long since come to the realization that if his grandmother and granduncles could recover their cultivation bases, then considering their previous standing within the clan, the bloodline would no longer continue to decline. Time passed. Meng Hao spent his days giving sermons about the Tao and treating his grandmother and granduncles. He also worked on the cultivation bases of his 3 aunts and 2 uncles. As the entire group improved, their auras grew more powerful day by day. As for his 2 uncles who had previously been so down and out, their eyes burned with life and vigor. Now they had hope. His 3 aunts recovered fastest of all. Within about 10 days, they already possessed the battle prowess of immortals. His grandmother and granduncles recovered the slowest, and yet were gradually beginning to emanate more profound pressure. Because of the strong immortal chi available for cultivation, all the other bloodline clan members were stabilizing their cultivation bases, and every few days, someone would make a breakthrough. Although all such breakthroughs were within the spirit realm, it was still possible to see that the bloodline had excellent latent talent, and the previous hard work they had gone through in their cultivation was now leading to large numbers of cultivation-based breakthroughs. Lately, everyone in the bloodline felt full of hope, and whenever they looked at Meng Hao, it was with fervent ardor. In sharp contrast was the ancestral mansion of the Meng clan. People there were as jumpy as if enemy soldiers lurked around every corner, and the slightest breeze could cause panic. During the 10 days which passed, everyone in the 9 bloodlines learned of what had happened, much to their shock. The defensive spell formation was constantly on, as if war were expected to break out at any time. Another month passed, and Meng Hao could tell that his 4th nirvana fruit had been completely absorbed. A mere thought on his part could summon the door of the ancient realm. Furthermore, his grandmother and the others had reached a critical juncture in the healing process. On one particular day, all of the bloodline clan members ceased meditating and stood guard. It didn't matter that their cultivation bases were relatively weak, they would still not allow anyone to disturb what was happening. His grandmother and everyone else was out in the courtyard, while Meng Hao sat cross-legged alone indoors. Wisps of white mist rose up from his head, transforming into clouds, within which could be heard the faint sound of thunder. After a moment, Meng Hao's eyes opened and they shone brightly. He began to speak, and soon his words were heard by his grandmother and granduncles. Grandma Meng will go last. Granduncles, you will go just before her. I'll start with everyone else. Meng Hao could accept that accidents might happen with the others, but he wanted to be absolutely certain of being able to successfully treat his grandmother. He would use the others to ensure that he was comfortable with the process. That was why the final person he would treat would be his grandmother. Grandma Meng took a deep breath, eyes shining brightly as she extended her hand, pointing toward one of her two sons, who had a very excited expression on his face. That was Meng Hao's seventh uncle, who took a deep breath as he entered the room where Meng Hao awaited them. He looked at Meng Hao sitting there cross-legged, then clasped hands and bowed deeply. Finally, he sat down cross-legged in front of him. Meng Hao nodded, then reached out and placed a finger onto his seventh uncle's forehead. Then he rotated his cultivation base and poured the power of an all-heaven Tao immortal into him. Seventh uncle's body began to tremble, and he was clearly in pain. Gradually, 9 spikes began to emerge from within him. A moment later, a pinging sound could be heard as one of the spikes fell to the ground. In that instant, seventh uncle's cultivation base surged with power. Next was a second spike, then a third, until 8 of the spikes were removed. In that moment, seventh uncle's cultivation base was completely restored and surged with the power of the early ancient realm. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as he pulled his hand back from seventh uncle's forehead. As he did, a 9th spike flew out from seventh uncle's forehead. Seventh uncle shivered, then threw his head back and roared. His cultivation base erupted with explosive power, moving past the mid-ancient realm. Trembling as he took stock of his body's condition, he stood up, expression one of complete excitement as he once again clasped hands and bowed to Meng Hao, then turned and left. The process went similarly with the second person in line, and the third and the fourth. 2 uncles, 3 aunts. All 5 people had 9 spikes stuck in their bodies, which Meng Hao extracted one by one. As of this moment, his grandmother's bloodline now had 5 ancient realm experts. The highest cultivation base among them belonged to his 5th aunt, who was in the great circle of the ancient realm, just on the verge of being able to break through. Around the same time that the spikes were being removed from the 5 of them, in the 7th mountain and sea, past the invisible barrier which separated it from the 8th mountain and sea, an altar could be seen floating in the starry sky. Suddenly, rumbling booms could be heard coming from that altar. The huge altar had an enormous magical symbol on its surface, and it only took a single glance for one to be able to tell that it was the character Meng. Numerous stone spikes could be seen stabbing into the character, a total of 9 of them. The spike in the middle was the largest, with the spikes growing smaller as they neared the edges of the character. Furthermore, all of those stone spikes oozed blood, causing the entire altar to be stained bright red. That was only one of the altars. There were other altars in the area, a total of 9. Apparently, this was a very important part of the 7th mountain and sea, as roughly 100,000 cultivators were standing watch over the area, including 9 Tao realm experts. About the time that Meng Hao removed the spikes from his 2 uncles and 3 aunts, rumbling sounds filled the area, and on 2 of the 9 altars, all of the stone spikes suddenly collapsed. The 100,000 cultivators suddenly shivered and opened their eyes. The Tao realm experts seemed especially affected, and their faces darkened. Something else happened in the 8th mountain and sea, in the Meng clan. Someone is tampering with the Lord Elimination spell formations. It doesn't matter, as long as the master formation isn't broken, it will be nothing more than an inconvenience. The 9 Tao realm experts' faces flickered as they looked at the 5th altar out of the 9 respectively. Then they went to action, both stabilizing the altars and also sending their divine sense out in an explosive tempest. As the 9 Tao realm experts were working on the altars, back in the Meng clan in the 8th mountain and sea, one of Meng Hao's granduncles walked into the room and sat down cross-legged. A serious expression flickered on Meng Hao's face, and he placed not just a finger, but his entire palm onto his granduncle's forehead. Seeing the serious look on Meng Hao's face, his granduncle laughed heartily and said, "Go all out with your cultivation base, my life isn't that important." As Meng Hao's cultivation-based power poured into him, he began to shake. Meng Hao spent more time with him than he had with the previous 5 combined. As he extracted the spikes, his granduncle's cultivation base rocketed up madly, and soon was in the great circle of the ancient realm. "Last one," Meng Hao said. He pulled his hand back and rumbling sounds could be heard. Blood sprayed out of his granduncle's mouth as the 9th spike flew out of his forehead. As it did, it was possible to see a black thread attached to it, which caused Meng Hao's eyes to flicker. He quickly cut the thread, causing a cracking sound to be heard. His granduncle coughed up another mouthful of blood, and yet his face began to change. He no longer looked like he had just crawled out of a grave. Although he was still old, his face radiated a powerful life force, and his cultivation base progressed even further. He was now past the Great Circle, and was comparable to the Quasi-Dao realm. He laughed heartily as he rose to his feet, his energy surging and brilliant light shining from his eyes. He was now as he had been before all of the tragedy. He looked down at Meng Hao with a gentle expression and murmured, "It's high time our bloodline rises to prominence again." With that he turned and vanished, reappearing outside, where he took a long, deep breath. Rumbling could be heard as he sucked in a massive quantity of the energy of heaven and earth. When that 9th spike was extracted and the thread was severed, back in the 7th mountain and sea, the stone spikes on another of the 9 altars shattered. Furthermore, the altar itself trembled and cracks spread out across its surface. It looked like it would collapse at any moment. The surrounding cultivators' faces flickered, and they performed incantation gestures. The 9 Dao realm experts frowned, once again going to work to stabilize the altars. However, before much time passed, the same thing happened to the 4th altar that had just occurred to all the others. That was when the second of Meng Hao's granduncles had his final spike extracted, and experienced an incredible increase in cultivation base. The 9 Dao realm cultivators' faces flickered, and one of them roared, "Damn it, we can't let any more of the altars be cracked. The 5th altar is the primary formation. It mustn't be interfered with. That will influence the entire offensive. Pour your divine sense into it and stop whoever is breaking the formations." The other 8 had serious expressions in their eyes as they performed incantation gestures, and sent their divine sense rumbling out. Chapter 1263, Removing 9 Spikes, the 7th Sea Mobilizes. Chapter 1264, Just Where Are You? Something else happened when 4 of the altars cracked, something that occurred in the 8th mountain and sea, but not in the Ming clan. Instead, it was in the Heaven God Alliance, in the very middle of the 8th mountain and sea, on the 8th mountain. At the very peak of that mountain was a heavenly pool, within which was a Xianxia turtle, sitting there with its eyes closed. Next to the pond was a temple. Heaven God Temple. That was where the legendary and mysterious lord of the 8th mountain and sea resided, Heaven God. No one other than Heaven God could set foot into that area of the mountain peak, as it was a restricted area. Currently, there was an oil lamp burning in Heaven God Temple. That lamp burned eternally, and despite the fact that there was no wind, the flame danced, casting flickering lights about in the temple. Also visible within the temple was a huge throne, upon which sat a mysterious-looking figure. His face was impossible to see. He wore a black robe and his head was bowed as he sat there, completely unmoving. However, it was possible to see that this heaven god was wearing a mask. On that mask was an image of an intertwined turtle and snake. 1. In Chinese mythology, the Xianxia turtle is often depicted as being intertwined with a snake. See this image. P.S. If I recall correctly, Patriarch Reliance was initially described as looking like this type of turtle, which is why I never found it weird that his head face could appear in the state of Zhao above his shell. As one altar after another cracked in the 7th mountain and sea, the figure on the throne began to twitch, almost as if he were waking up. Each time he did, the flame in the lamp also danced. The figure on the throne was the most supreme and paramount figure in the 8th mountain and sea, the mountain and sea lord Heaven God. There were many legends about this person. Some said that Heaven God came from the Han clan. Some said that he came from the Ming clan. There were some people who claimed that Heaven God had always existed and did not originate in the mountain and sea realm. Regardless of any of that, in all the years, no one had ever seen the true features which lay beneath Heaven God's mask. What people saw never changed. He always looked exactly like this. Gradually, other rumors spread, although few people believed them because of their utter bizarreness. According to those rumors, Heaven God had not always existed. According to these legends, mountain and sea lords did not live forever, and in fact, all of them had limited longevity. The only reason they continued to exist was because each mountain and sea lord had a unique way of fooling the heavens to continue on existing. Supposedly, one of the methods, the one used by Heaven God of the eighth mountain and sea, was the transference of their legacy. Supposedly, when Heaven God died, he would find a successor to pass on his legacy to, and thus ensure that Heaven God existed forever in a type of transmigration. Meanwhile, back in the eighth mountain and sea, on one of the Meng clan's continents, Meng Hao rose to his feet and bowed deeply as his grandmother entered the room. Meng Hao had not bowed in greeting to anyone else who had entered the room, only to her. Grandma Meng looked at him with a kind expression on her face, nodding as she sat down cross-legged in front of him. Meng Hao took a deep breath, and a look of concentration covered his face as he sat down somberly. "Don't be nervous," she said quietly. "I've lived for a long, long time and experienced many things. There are few hardships which I would shy away from anymore, so even if you fail, it doesn't matter. With your two granduncles having been restored, our bloodline is already destined to rise to prominence. If I die, the only thing I'll regret is that I won't have a chance to see your grandpa Ming again. I can sense that he hasn't perished and that he isn't very far away." Finally, she sighed. Meng Hao had mixed feelings, especially considering that his grandfather had gone missing while trying to save him. "Grandma Meng, you won't have any regrets," he said softly. "I'm going to succeed in this, and one day I'm going to find Grandpa Meng too." His grandmother chuckled, and the kindness in her eyes grew stronger. Meng Hao took a deep breath and performed a double-handed incantation gesture. He was now very familiar with how to extract the spikes and was very confident in his actions. He raised both hands and placed them onto his grandmother's forehead, then unleashed the full power of his cultivation base. Even when treating his two granduncles, he had only used 30% of the power of his cultivation base. Now, he was going all out. His grandmother began to tremble, and suddenly, 9 areas on her body, including her forehead, began to shine with brilliant light. Those 9 areas were where the spikes were located. As soon as Meng Hao saw the glowing light, his face flickered, and he suddenly heard 9 voices roaring in his ears. "Whoever dares to touch this spell formation will die." Those 9 voices joined together, and their words stabbed into Meng Hao's mind as if to destroy it. "You overestimate yourself," he replied with a cold snort, eyes flickering with killing intent. Because he had cultivated the Tao divinity scripture, his divine sense was incredibly powerful. He immediately sent it out to counter the 9 wolves entering his mind. He was essentially fighting the Tao realm now, in a 1-against-9 fight. Rumbling could be heard as Meng Hao trembled. However, his 2 hands remained firmly in place. As his grandmother trembled and the light grew more brilliant, the spikes began to be forced out. It was at this point that, back in the 7th mountain and sea, the 9 Tao realm experts' faces flickered, and they went all out with every scrap of power they could muster, and yet they were completely incapable of doing anything to the person interfering with the spell formation. "I'm familiar with all the powerful experts in the 8th mountain and sea. Where did this person come from? It must be a peak Tao lord, someone on the verge of becoming a Tao sovereign. Damn it. Just wait and see how long he can hold out. As long as Heaven God doesn't wake up and make a move, he won't have an easy time breaking the altar spell formation." Roaring, the 9 Tao realm cultivators unleashed their divine sense again in an attempt to stop Meng Hao. Rumbling sounds emanated as they fought, separated by a vast distance, yet no one besides they themselves could hear it. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as he reached down and smacked the ground. The lightning cauldron appeared, floating above his head, pulsing with the power of lightning. In the blink of an eye, Meng Hao and his grandmother vanished from the room to reappear in an empty field a vast distance away. Meng Hao's grandmother had her eyes closed, and thus didn't even notice that the teleportation had occurred. Almost as soon as they appeared, he summoned the Paragon Bridge, sending a massive power shooting out in 9 different directions. Intense rumbling sounds echoed out as 9 ravines were carved deep into the earth, within which black flames burned. Looking to die, Meng Hao's face was grim as his right hand flashed with an incantation gesture. Then he pressed down onto his grandmother's shoulder, from within which popped out a spike. His grandmother didn't tremble, but the spike did. It also emanated a black mist which formed together into the face of an old man who howled at Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes went wide, and he quickly sucked in a breath. The face collapsed back into black mist, which Meng Hao then breathed in. Then he bit down hard, and a scream could be heard. At the same time, back in the 7th mountain and sea, one of the 9 Tao realm experts next to the altars suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. He consumed the divine sense I sent out. It was at this point that, one by one, the other old men began to cough up blood. First a second, then a third, and a fourth, and a fifth. Next, rumbling could be heard from the fifth altar as the stone spikes there began to shatter. The altar was trembling, and cracks spread out across its surface. "Combine all of our power," roared one of the 9 Tao realm experts. "Prevent the spell formation from being broken. The fifth altar is too important. It must not be broken." Immediately, the surrounding 100,000 cultivators performed incantation gestures and began to murmur complex curse spells. Almost immediately, they began to shiver, and their bodies withered visibly. Within the space of a few breaths of time, all 100,000 cultivators looked like nothing more than bags of bones. It was a huge sacrifice on their part, but the result was a shocking curse power that surged toward the altar. In the 8th mountain and sea, Meng Hao sat on the wide plain, hands flickering as he placed numerous sealing marks onto his grandmother. The entire time, she hadn't trembled once and had kept her eyes closed. It was a completely different scene from when he had extracted the spikes from the others. That was because she was Meng Hao's grandmother, and he was working as hard as possible to ensure that any pain she felt was reduced as much as possible. As the spikes were removed, they emanated black mist, which turned into faces. Meng Hao consumed them all until finally 8 spikes had been forced out. His expression was very serious as he placed both hands onto his grandmother's forehead and then wrenched them backwards. Shocking rumbling sounds could be heard, as if lightning and thunder were pounding the land. A black spot appeared on his grandmother's forehead as the 9th spike flew out. It was accompanied by numerous illusory figures, all of them screaming as they spewed forth like an eruption. This was the curse power converged by the sacrifice of the 100,000 cultivators, plus the rage of the final Tao realm expert directed at anyone who would try to sever this connection's power. Meng Hao's face turned grim and he let out a cold snort. Then his right hand lifted into the air and his eyes began to shine. Almost in the same moment that the curse power touched him, it exploded out into boundless black mist that instantly enveloped him. However, it was also in that same moment that Meng Hao completely severed the 9th spike from his grandmother. The restrictive spell that had been placed upon her vanished, and the 5th altar in the 7th mountain and sea shattered into countless pieces. The other 4 had merely been cracked and fragmented, but now they also exploded, ensuring that of the original 9 altars, only 4 remained intact. At the same time, in the Heaven God Temple on the 8th mountain, the figure seated on the throne began to tremble violently. Almost imperceptibly, the mask flashed with light, as if the eyes behind that mask had opened a sliver. A terrifying pressure then radiated out from within those eyes. Gradually, the figure's mouth moved, and he said something that no one could hear, something said only to himself. He said, "Hayor." Meanwhile, back on the vast plain on the continent in the Meng clan, Meng Hao was trembling. Then he threw his head back and roared, and cracking sounds rang out from inside of him. His cultivation base surged with power, and greed's life force began to emanate from his 4th nirvana fruit. That was the moment in which his grandmother awoke. As she did, her cultivation base rocketed up, and her eyes opened to see Meng Hao and the black mist covering him. "Hey, are you?" Within the black mist, Meng Hao took a deep breath. Just as he was about to dispel the mist, he suddenly experienced a sensation of extreme danger coming from out in the starry sky. "Grandma Meng, I'm fine. You head back now, I just need some time to get rid of this curse." Eyes narrowing, he suddenly teleported out into the starry sky along with the black mist. His grandmother's face darkened, and she fell back a few steps. Looking up into the sky toward where Meng Hao had disappeared, she didn't even think about her own cultivation base, but instead began to worry about Meng Hao's safety. If something bad happened to him, it wouldn't matter that her cultivation base had recovered. She would feel unending guilt. Suddenly, she thought about Meng Hao's grandfather and she sighed. "Just where are you?" Chapter 1265, Comeback. Meng Hao teleported out into the starry sky, where he hovered cross-legged, surrounded by black mist. At the same time, further out in the inky black and beyond the continents of the Meng clan, a figure hovered a great distance from Meng Hao, gazing at him. It was a handsome young man in a long black robe. His hair floated around him, and in some respects he almost seemed as if he were a part of the starry sky itself. Few people would ever be able to detect his presence. It was none other than Jade from the 9th mountain and sea. As soon as Meng Hao left for the 8th mountain and sea, he had followed, and now here he was looking at Meng Hao. Jade seemed a bit hesitant, but his eyes glittered. He had been watching Meng Hao for 3 days now, and currently, a slight smile could be seen on his face. This Meng Hao is one cunning, crafty character. Even if the curse power from the seventh mountain and sea is tough to deal with, it shouldn't have caused him this much of a problem. Jai eyes gleamed with decisiveness as he backed up and then vanished. In the moment that he vanished, Meng Hao was hovering cross-legged above the Ming clan continent, surrounded by black mist. However, his eyes were flickering as he stared in the direction in which Jai vanished. The curse power was not weak, but just as Jai had said, it wasn't anything that would cause difficulty for Meng Hao. 3 days ago, just when he had been about to dispel the mist, he had suddenly experienced a sensation of crisis coming from the direction of the starry sky. That sensation was too sudden, and was something he almost hadn't sensed coming. Apparently, the fully absorbed fourth nirvana fruit had bestowed him even keener senses than before. Meng Hao wasn't sure of the source of the danger, but he had decided to delay in dispelling the curse, all in the hopes of drawing out whoever it was that was a threat. However, that person was too cautious, and after waiting for 3 days had given up. After a moment of thought, Meng Hao waved his right hand, causing the black curse mist to begin to roil. A moment later, it began to converge inside of him. The 3 days of refinement ensured that it only took the time it takes an incense stick to burn for the black mist to vanish completely. The only part that remained of it was a tiny black spot on the tip of Meng Hao's finger. Shockingly, that was the refined combination of all of the curse power. Meng Hao looked at his pitch-black fingertip and thought, getting rid of this curse power would be a big waste. I'm sure I can find some way to use it. After looking out into the starry sky once more, he swished his sleeve and vanished. When he reappeared, he was back down on the Ming clan continent, where he became a beam of light that shot toward his grandmother's location. His grandmother had been waiting nervously for days, so when Meng Hao returned, she breathed a sigh of relief, her eyes radiating boundless affection. Meng Hao was her grandson, and although he might not have a strong blood connection to the others, he was still her direct relative and descendant. After Meng Hao's return, all of his grandmother's people continued to make cultivation-based breakthroughs. That was especially true of Meng Hao's 2 uncles and 3 aunts, and even more so his 2 granduncles. By now, their cultivation bases had returned to their previous peaks. His granduncles were in the great circle of the ancient realm, and although they had not yet stepped into the Dao realm, they could battle evenly with quasi-Dao cultivators. As far as his grandmother, she was also in the great circle of the ancient realm, but now that her cultivation base was restored, Meng Hao could sense some unique fluctuations on her. Apparently, that had something to do with the Ming clan itself. As of this point, everyone was making preparations to make a comeback in the clan. The time has come to settle things in the Ming clan, Grandma Ming murmured. What once was ours will be ours once more. The gleam in her eyes had been buried for too long. As she stood there with Meng Hao's 2 granduncles next to her, rumbling sounds began to echo out. It's time to leave. We're going home. With that, she took a step forward, joined by Meng Hao's 2 granduncles, 2 uncles, and 3 aunts, all of them transformed into beams of light that shot toward the Ming clan's central continent. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he followed along at his grandmother's side. As for the other members of the bloodline, they were told to stay behind. Even though their cultivation bases were higher than before, they weren't high enough to allow them to participate in the fight that was about to take place. Rumbling echoed out as Meng Hao and the others shot toward the main continent. It only took a short time before they arrived at the ancestral mansion. Mixed emotions could be seen on the faces of his grandmother and granduncles, and as for his uncles and aunts, reminiscence could be seen in their eyes. They had been chased away from this place years ago and had never imagined that they would be able to return. But now, here they were. The only reason they could do so was because of Meng Hao, and although you couldn't tell by the expressions on their faces when they looked at him, their hearts were filled with infinite gratitude. The Ming clan ancestral mansion was surrounded by a shimmering shield, which was the clan's grand protective spell formation. Meng Hao had clashed with the shield before and knew how powerful it was. Just when he was about to advance toward it, his grandmother held out her hand. "Hey, she said softly, "I can handle this spell formation." With that, she waved her finger at the grand spell formation. That swipe of a finger caused the grand spell formation, which filled even Meng Hao with dread, to suddenly begin to rumble. Then, a fissure spread out across its surface. One of Meng Hao's 2 granduncles turned to explain. Your grandmother's skill with spell formations is something that few people in the 8th Mountain and Sea can match. After marrying into the Ming clan, she was entrusted with the responsibility of maintaining and adjusting the clan's defensive spell formation. Other than the patriarchs, nobody else in the clan understands it better than her. This spell formation is your grandmother's most powerful precious treasure. Then his granduncle transformed into a beam of light that shot into the Ming clan ancestral mansion. Meng Hao stared in shock for a brief moment, then looked over at his grandmother and smiled as he followed her along. They're entering the ancestral mansion, threw the entire clan into an uproar. The 9 bloodlines were already on guard because of what had happened earlier with Meng Hao, and now that the spell formation was rumbling and rippling, numerous people flew out to investigate. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of beams of light were flying directly toward them. Meng Chen, someone roared, just what do you The person speaking stopped in mid-sentence. He wasn't the only shocked one. Everyone was staring in astonishment at Grandma Meng and the others. Why they? People soon began to recognize who had just arrived, although the only ones who did were old-timers, whose faces were now filled with shock. Recognize me? Said one of Meng Hao's granduncles, stepping forward. Even if you don't, that's fine. I'm Meng Hong. When his foot descended, everything rumbled violently and the clouds above roiled. It was as if lightning were striking, and numerous booming explosions echoed out through the ancestral mansion. Even as the ground quaked, Meng Hao's other granduncle stepped forward, expression cold. His voice was soft like a hissing vapor, causing chills to run up the spines of everyone who heard him speak. I'm Meng Yan. It's been a few hundred years, but there should be a few of you who remember me. Gasps could be heard among the hundreds of Meng clan cultivators up ahead. The 10th bloodline, it's the 10th bloodline. It doesn't matter if you call us the 10th bloodline or the 1st, Grandma Meng said coolly. Today, we're back. She waved her hand, causing the entire defensive spell formation to rumble loudly. The sound was incredible, and it was bolstered by Grandma Meng's voice until the sound itself whipped around, transforming into a tempest. It was at this point that rumbling could also be heard from within 9 separate districts of the Ming clan ancestral mansion. Numerous beams of light shot out like lightning, filling the sky above the Ming clan with over 10,000 beams of light. Down on the ground were even more members of the Ming clan, who were looking up into the sky, shocked expressions on their faces as the spell formation rumbled in response to Grandma Meng's voice. Soon, all eyes converged onto Meng Hao's grandmother. Then the shocked experts of the clan noticed that Meng Hao was standing right behind his grandmother, and they gasped. Grandma Meng stood there stoically, looking around. To her, it was easy to differentiate between the various factions that were the 9 bloodlines. With a cold snort, she began to advance, and no one made a move to interfere. Right now, nobody wanted to offend the 10th bloodline, especially considering that Meng Hao was with them. His fight with the Ming clan patriarchs had struck fear deep into the hearts of all onlookers. Before Grandma Meng got very far, she suddenly looked down at the ancestral mansion, toward one particular hall that was surrounded by smaller halls and other buildings to form something like a small city. This is where Hayar's mother once lived, Grandma Meng said coolly, a domineering air radiating off of her. Whoever is in there now had better scram immediately. We're taking the place back. The faction affected was immediately enraged. That's pushing things too far. This is the ancestral home of the 7th bloodline. How dare you? Next, a cold voice rang out from that large hall. Liu Ziu, this is too much. A white-haired old man emerged, whose cultivation base was in the great circle of the ancient realm. So you still recognize little old me, said Grandma Meng, her eyes flickering with killing intent. Wasn't it you who watched us getting chased away back then and did nothing to help? Even worse, you were happy to kick us when we were down. Waving her right hand, she caused the Ming clan grand spell formation to converge above her head. Chapter 1266, Not Strong Enough. Kill them, Grandma Meng said calmly. The instant her voice rang out, Meng Hao's 2 granduncles transformed into beams of light that shot toward the old man outside the hall. Meng Hao's uncles and aunts also unleashed their cultivation bases as they charged forward. The old man's face flickered, and the other members of the 7th bloodline roared and attacked. Instantly, shocking and fierce fighting broke out. The wave of Grandma Meng's hand caused a roaring to fill the air that sounded like it came from the mouth of an enormous giant. Under her control, the Meng clan's grand protective spell formation became numerous beams of light that shot through the air toward the cultivators of the 7th bloodline. Miserable screams rang out. Although the spell formation wouldn't kill members of the main clan, the cultivators of the seventh bloodline who were hit by the beams of light experienced an instant drop in cultivation base. In the end, the protective spell formation became boundless light that covered the entire seventh bloodline. It didn't matter how many of them there were, they were incapable of fighting back. The miserable screams continued to ring out, and soon blood began to flow, filling the air with the reek of gore. Cries of shock and disbelief began to echo about. She can actually control the protective spell formation. That's the Ming clan's spell formation. She doesn't have the blood of the Ming clan in her, how can she control it? Is the spell formation actually the Ming clan's or not? As the shouts of alarm filled the air, the older experts suddenly remembered something, and their faces fell. The old man outside the hall roared in rage, and yet was no match for the granduncles. However, this was one of the 9 bloodlines of the Ming clan, and they had many powerful experts, including numerous cultivators in the immortal realm. All of them attacked simultaneously, causing massive rumbling to fill the air. They might have been suppressed by the spell formation, but the cultivators from Meng Hao's grandmother's bloodline were few in number. Just as it seemed like they were about to be overwhelmed, Meng Hao prepared to step in. However, Grandma Ming gave a cold harumph and pushed her hand down toward the ground. "Sin Blade, come hither," she said. The main hall of the seventh bloodline suddenly began to shake, and then a huge crevice opened up, out of which a black light shone. Shockingly, within that light was a black dagger. The sight of that dagger caused the minds of the Ming clan cultivators to reel, and their blood to suddenly surge. A Sin Blade, I can't believe it's really the Sin Blade. Those things still exist, how could it be possible? Sin Blades are formed from thousands of years of clan blood, and are used to punish traitorous clan members. Only 3 were ever forged, and according to the legends, they were lost in the sands of time. But that's definitely a Sin Blade. She's not a real Ming clan cultivator, she married into the clan. But it doesn't matter how old she is, she shouldn't be able to control the spell formation and also a Sin Blade. The old man from the seventh bloodline stared with wide, disbelieving eyes. He obviously knew what Sin Blades were, but he could never have imagined that there was one buried beneath his bloodline's territory and furthermore, could actually be controlled by this old woman. Grandma Ming eyed the black dagger, and she seemed to be thinking about the past. With a soft sigh, she made a grasping motion with her right hand, causing the dagger to fly into her grasp. Then she pointed it at the old man. "By the authority conferred upon me by the Ming clan torture hall," she said coolly, "I hereby excise you from the Ming clan." As she spoke, a flickering, blood-red sealing mark appeared on her forehead. As soon as the members of the older generation saw that mark, they let out a collective gasp. A bloodline seal. Now it makes sense. As the grand elder of the clan back then, Meng Shan would have been qualified to bestow bloodline seals like that, to pass on his legacy to others. In that same moment, Grandma Ming slashed the blade toward the old man from the seventh bloodline, causing black light to flare out and then stab down toward him. He tried to fight back, but was instantly cut down by Meng Hao's granduncles. His head flew off of his shoulders and his body exploded. The other members of the seventh bloodline, even the elders, were shocked and immediately began to flee. Grandma Ming ignored them. Then a tremor ran through her which no one except for Meng Hao noticed. He could tell that the so-called Sin Blade really was formed by a convergence of will. That will came from the spirit of the people who had sacrificed their blood to forge the blade. Because of that, only someone with a bloodline sealing mark could control the weapon. Although nothing seemed out of the ordinary, slashing out with the blade just now had actually injured her. After all, she really wasn't a true member of the Ming clan. As for how she was able to control the grand protective spell formation, Meng Hao had already picked up on some of the clues. He could sense some of his grandmother's aura within the grand spell formation, and could also sense fluctuations from the spell formation on her. It's not because of any Taoist magic. Actually, the grand protective spell formation is allowing her to control it. Meng Hao looked thoughtfully at the Ming clan ancestral mansion and the tallest structure therein, the enormous statue. That was not only where the Tao realm patriarch stayed in secluded meditation, it was also the nucleus of the grand protective spell formation. There were now no more members of the seventh bloodline in the main hall below. They had all fled. Meng Hao remained in a position behind his grandmother, watching everything play out silently and not interfering. He would comply with his grandmother's wishes in everything. Truth be told, he only cared about his grandmother's bloodline. As for the rest of the Meng clan, they didn't matter much to him at all. Grandma Meng turned to Meng Hao, a kind smile on her face as she said, "Hey, this is where your mother used to live, and today I'm bequeathing it to you." Then she turned, looking coldly in the direction of where the first bloodline lay in the shadow of the enormous statue. "That is where we used to live," she said, proceeding forward. The other members of the Meng clan who were in her way hesitated for a moment, then fell back to make way, the fear in their eyes clear. Meng Hao's grandmother could control the spell formation and the Sin Blade, plus had a bloodline sealing mark. All of that ensured that none of the other bloodlines were willing to attack. After all, they were confident that the 10th bloodline wasn't out to exterminate all of the other clan members. However, as Grandma Meng and the others neared the district where the first bloodline was located, a growling voice echoed out from within the enormous statue. "Enough, we're all part of the Meng clan after all. There will be no more internecine strife within the clan. The 10th bloodline has returned and the whole Meng clan should be celebrating that. There's no need for fighting." In response to his words, all of the surrounding members of the Meng clan began to bow their heads. Grandma Meng was the only one who simply looked up at the statue, a complex look in her eyes. After a long moment, she spoke in a raspy voice. "Is that you, Patriarch Meng Yan? I'm fine with holding back from killing, but the place occupied by the first bloodline belongs to us. Tell them to clear out and we can call an end to the matter immediately." 1. Meng Hao's granduncle is named Chinese letter Meng Yan, whereas this patriarch is Chinese letter Meng Yan. As you can see, there are two different Yan characters, and if you look at the tone marks you can see that their pronunciation is slightly different. "Impossible," said a cold, grim voice from within the district occupied by the first bloodline. "Your cultivation base is in the piddling great circle of the ancient realm. If it weren't for that junior generation expert behind you, it wouldn't matter that you can control the spell formation and the Sin Blade, you still wouldn't be qualified to cause a ruckus." The owner of the voice emerged, a white-haired young boy. His face was distorted in rage, and he emanated the aura of the Quasi-Dao realm. However, that aura was filled with a sensation of decay, as if his longevity within the Quasi-Dao realm was almost completely expended. That just made him seem more maddened, and as he emerged, killing intent surged. He flicked his sleeve and was just about to continue speaking, when Meng Hao interrupted. "Pipe down," he said, his voice cool and calm. His words transformed into a powerful, invisible force which instantly stopped the white-haired boy in his tracks. "When the adults are talking, pipsqueaks like you should keep their traps shut. If you don't, however many hundreds of years of longevity you have left, I can end them now." As Meng Hao's cold voice echoed about, the white-haired boy stood there trembling, eyes bright red as he glared at Meng Hao. Grandma Meng stood there silently, as did Meng Hao's granduncles, uncles, and aunts. They had to admit that all of this was happening because of Meng Hao, and if it weren't for his help, their comeback would have been impossible. Meng Hao sighed. How could he not have come to realize the same thing himself? It became especially apparent to him when he realized that his grandmother had injured herself in the attack. Finally, he turned, clasped hands and bowed deeply to his grandmother. "Grandma Meng, may I please take care of the situation?" His grandmother looked back at him for a moment, then finally smiled. "I guess there's no need to hold you back. All right, go ahead and take care of things." Meng Hao smiled, then turned, gaze calm as he looked at the white-haired boy. "Scram." "You," the boy cried, eyes widening, body trembling. It didn't matter that he wasn't a match for Meng Hao. Considering he was in front of the entire clan, he couldn't help but yell at Meng Hao in such a way. After all, his life would be ending soon anyway, so how could he fear death? Before he could say anything else, Meng Hao snorted coldly. Then he flickered into motion, suddenly appeared directly in front of the young boy. There he waved his hand, causing a massive tempest to spring up, with the boy at the center. It rapidly became a tornado, which spread out in the blink of an eye to cover the entire district occupied by the first bloodline, picking up their cultivators and spinning them around, causing blood-curdling shrieks to ring out. The white-haired boy was at the center of it all. Meng Hao burned with hatred because of the insulting words he had spoken to his grandmother moments ago, so he waved his hand, causing the boy to let out a miserable scream. His body trembled and then began to disappear into a haze of blood and gore. His already reduced longevity was now forcibly being scraped away. Within the space of a few breaths of time, he transformed into ash which then faded away. Everything was deathly silent. All eyes came to rest on Meng Hao, and they were filled with fear. That was the exact result Meng Hao had been aiming for. He couldn't stay in the 8th mountain and see for long, and if Grandma Meng wasn't willing to go to the ninth mountain and see, then he had to ensure that they had a strong position within the Meng clan. If their position was strong enough, then when he left, the bloodline would be safe. Anyone who dared to think about provoking them would definitely consider the ramifications first. Unfortunately, their position isn't strong enough yet, he thought. Then he looked up at the statue, eyes flashing like lightning as his gaze pierced inside to stare at the 5 Dao realm experts sitting there. Chapter 1267, Together. In almost the same moment that Meng Hao looked over at the statue, the 3 lucid Dao realm experts inside could tell, and their faces flickered. The patriarch from the 9th bloodline looked at Meng Hao, then at the members of his own bloodline, and especially Meng De, who wore a very complex expression. The patriarch from the 8th bloodline had fought briefly with Meng Hao already, so he sat there gritting his teeth, not daring to emerge. However, his heart was filled with anticipation at the prospect of the patriarch from the 1st bloodline stepping into the fray. That very patriarch was the last among the group of 3 to have awakened. He had long red hair which continuously burned with fire, and he currently sat there cross-legged, a grim expression on his face. After a long moment passed, he slowly rose to his feet and stepped forward, appearing outside the statue in front of Meng Hao. As soon as he appeared outside, the surrounding members of the Meng clan looked up at him. No one cheered, though. Everyone stared at him and Meng Hao. "You're not part of the Meng clan," the red-haired old man said, his voice ancient and sinister. "Whether I am or not doesn't matter," Meng Hao replied calmly. "That's true, it's not important. Old 8th, old 9th, if you don't do something, then our Meng clan is going to fall to a stranger this day." Flames burst out around the red-haired old man, a manifestation of essence of flame which caused the surrounding air to distort. Back in the statue, the patriarch from the 8th bloodline gritted his teeth, then finally chose to emerge. The patriarch from the 9th bloodline, the one who had actually met Meng Hao, also came out. 3 patriarchs had emerged, and finally, anticipation began to shine in the eyes of the Meng clan cultivators, as well as excitement. In their minds, even if Meng Hao were stronger than he was now, he still couldn't stand up to the combined might of these 3 patriarchs. "Just the 3 of you won't be enough," Meng Hao said, looking them over. Then his gaze shifted to the 2 slumbering figures that remained in the statue. "You've been awake for a while now. What's the point in pretending that you're still asleep?" he said. "You've lost the chance to make a sneak attack, so how about I give you the opportunity to come at me 5 against 1? If you win, I'll give you this treasure." With that, Meng Hao waved his hand, causing the lightning cauldron to materialize up above. It crackled with lightning and the aura of a precious treasure, causing the 3 patriarchs' eyes to widen and their minds to spin. Suddenly, 2 auras erupted out from within the statue. One of them was not quite at the level of a Dao Lord, but was very close. The other was very much at the Dao Lord level, and apparently was approaching 4 essences. However, the little bit that he lacked meant that he was not quite powerful enough to earn the title of Dao Sovereign. These 2 were the true patriarchs of the Meng clan, and the 2 of the most powerful forces that the Meng clan had produced in many, many years. As soon as their auras appeared, the air next to the 3 patriarchs standing outside of the statue flickered, and 2 people appeared out of nowhere. They looked incredibly old and emanated powerful ripples, especially the nearly 4 essences expert. He wore a long gray robe and emanated an air of decay. He looked deeply at Meng Hao and said, "What if you win?" "If I win, then the 5 of you must swear Dao oaths to protect my grandmother's bloodline for 1,000 years." Meng Hao stared at the nearly 4 essences patriarch, who was one who he deemed most worthy of his attention. He was curious to see if the fully absorbed 4th nirvana fruit would enable him to fight 4 or more essences. "Why only 1,000 years?" "Because 1,000 years from now," Meng Hao replied calmly, "as long as I haven't perished, no one in the mountain and sea realm would dare to harm any of my relatives in the least." Although his words seemed wildly arrogant to most of the people who heard them, the 5 Dao realm patriarchs' expressions turned serious. After exchanging glances, the 5 of them then nodded. In truth, they had no choice other than to fight. Besides, the stakes that Meng Hao had offered helped to ease the tension a bit. After all, the matter was an internal affair of the Meng clan, and handling it in this way would be mutually beneficial. "Very well," said the 4 essences Dao realm expert. Then he shot high up into the starry sky, followed by the 4 other patriarchs. After all, a Dao realm battle couldn't be fought down below, lest the power of the attack seep out and lead to widespread destruction in the Meng clan. Meng Hao looked over at his grandmother and could see the care and concern in her eyes. He smiled and nodded, then transformed into a beam of light that shot up into the starry sky. Instantly, certain members of the Meng clan utilized various magical techniques to project an image of the starry sky down below so that the other clan members could watch the fight. What they saw was Meng Hao appearing on the battlefield, and then, instantly, the 5 patriarchs attacking together. Rumbling filled the starry sky as soon as Meng Hao arrived. The patriarch from the first bloodline was slightly quicker than the others. An incantation gesture caused a sea of flames to burst out, which then transformed into a huge hand that reached out toward Meng Hao as if to grab him. The patriarch from the 8th bloodline threw his head back and roared, smacking his hands together in front of him, which caused a massive windstorm to erupt. That windstorm was backed by the power of his cultivation base and his essence of wind. It quickly transformed into a huge tornado which swept out an attack. The patriarch from the 9th bloodline made a somewhat strange attack. As he performed an incantation gesture, ripples spread out from his feet, filling the starry sky and causing an enormous mirror to materialize. Those 3 attacks were the most normal of the group. There were still 2 patriarchs left. The one who was close to being a Tao Lord began to glow with the color of blood, a glow that contained a towering will of slaughter. Shockingly, this was a type of essence that was very difficult to cultivate but very powerful, slaughter essence. The final patriarch was the strongest of the group. He took a deep breath, and as he did, a green glow appeared in the void. In the blink of an eye, even his body turned green, and a ring of green-colored lightning appeared around him. This was none other than green lightning magic. This was the most powerful Taoist magic in the Meng clan. Green lightning filled the area for 1,000 meters around the patriarch, a completely different type of green lightning than that used by Han Qinglei in the windswept realm. Meng Hao's expression didn't even flicker. Currently, his 4th nirvana fruit was completely absorbed, and a mere thought on his part could summon the door of the ancient realm. However, even if he didn't intend to do so, the powerful ripples of his cultivation base meant it was possible that the door might appear on its own. "Well," he murmured quietly, "before I step into the ancient realm, let's see how powerful my battle prowess has gotten." With that, his eyes gleamed brightly as he shot out toward the patriarch from the first bloodline. That patriarch performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing the enormous, all-powerful hand of flames to speed faster toward Meng Hao. That hand was formed completely from essence power, and was so strong that even a quasi-Dao cultivator who was struck by it would be completely destroyed, let alone weaker cultivators. It could even shatter massive asteroids. It whistled through the void, seemingly capable of burning everything as it bore down on Meng Hao. "I won't be unfair," Meng Hao said. "Since you're using flame essence, then I'll use the same thing to beat you." As soon as the words left his mouth, fire raged up around him, the complete manifestation of Meng Hao's essence of divine flame. As it appeared in full, it instantly began to rumble toward the first bloodline patriarch's flame essence. This was fire fighting fire, and it wasn't a matter of who could control it better. Rather, the question was, whose essence was stronger, whose essence was more terrifying. Meng Hao waved his hand, causing the flame essence around him to transform into a giant fist made of flames, which then punched out toward the first bloodline patriarch's flame hand. BOOOOMM. Everything shook as the patriarch's flame hand exploded. Meng Hao's divine flame fist also fell apart, but as it did, it revealed the image of a monkey, which threw its head back and roared. That roar caused all of the fire out in the starry sky to seethe. The power of divine flame then swept up together, forming a huge mouth which shot toward the first bloodline patriarch as if to consume him. However, in the moment before it did, Meng Hao snorted, causing the flame mouth to stop in place, let out a howl of defiance, and then slowly fade away. The patriarch from the first bloodline coughed up a mouthful of blood and then fell back into retreat, face flickering with shock. This was the first time he had ever been defeated by a similar essence, and were it not for the fact that Meng Hao wasn't in a killing mood, then he would have been killed beyond the shadow of a doubt. "You lose," Meng Hao said. Then he took another step, placing him directly in front of the 8th bloodline patriarch and his screaming windstorm, which shot menacingly toward Meng Hao. "I can't use wind essence," Meng Hao said, shaking his head. He allowed the windstorm to slam into him, a terrifying force that could even kill a quasi-Dao expert. Even Dao realm cultivators of the same level would fear that wind. However, as it swept over Meng Hao, although some wounds appeared, that was the extent of the matter. That caused the 8th bloodline patriarch to gasp and instantly flee. "I concede," he blurted, expression that of astonishment. The main source of his fear was that he could see that the injuries inflicted by the powerful windstorm couldn't keep up with how quickly Meng Hao's body was healing itself. Wounds that took 2 breaths of time to inflict were completely healed up almost instantly. What a terrifying fleshly body. How do you fight something like this? Meanwhile, the members of the Meng clan were all watching the scene play out on the enormous projection screen. They could clearly see Meng Hao use flame essence to defeat the first bloodline patriarch, and then use his astonishing fleshly body to defeat the essence Taoist magic of the 8th bloodline patriarch. From the position of the audience, he almost seemed invincible. See, compared to last time, it seems like he's even more powerful. What cultivation base does he have? He's so young, how could he be so strong? This was the first time for Meng Hao's grandmother to see how truly powerful he was. As she watched the images on the screen, a broad smile broke out on her face. As of this moment, she didn't care at all who was responsible for the comeback of the bloodline in the Meng clan. Whether it was her or Meng Hao didn't matter. That was because he was her grandson. Chapter 1268, The Door of the Ancient Realm is Coming. In almost the same moment that the 8th bloodline patriarch conceded, the 9th bloodline patriarch, the old man who had met Meng Hao before, suddenly roared, raising both hands into the air and then clapping them together viciously. "Mirror massacre," he yelled. Almost instantly, the starry sky beneath Meng Hao's feet began to ripple as if with waves. Shockingly, the area beneath him then transformed into a gigantic mirror that reflected everything above it, including Meng Hao and everyone else involved in the fight. Said Meng Hao. He had fought with Dao Realm experts a few times, but this was his first time seeing essence magic in the form of a mirror. He looked down at his reflection in the mirror, and the other version of himself did the same thing. When their eyes met, Meng Hao could suddenly feel a power like that of possession spreading out inside of him. At the same time, a bloody glow was closing in on him, within which was the essence of slaughter. It transformed into a blood-colored blade that slashed down toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's right hand flashed with an incantation gesture, causing numerous mountains to descend, blocking the blood blade. However, the blood blade blasted through them and a moment later slashed Meng Hao himself. Meng Hao looked down at the wound on his arm and the blood that oozed out from it. Apparently, even his restorative powers were incapable of healing the wound. Slaughter essence, he thought with some indifference. Without a moment of hesitation, he suddenly turned and raised his hand to point behind him. Instantly, the more than 1,000 green lightning bolts which had been shooting toward him stopped in place. But then an ancient voice echoed out. "Detonate." More than 1,000 lightning bolts exploded, inundating Meng Hao. At the same time, a red blade of light shot up from within the mirror down below, slashing toward Meng Hao with an air of blood and slaughter. At the same time, the over 1,000 bolts of green lighting in the mirror also exploded. Apparently, the mirror was a type of magic that could cause wounds to double in severity. Meng Hao was surrounded by explosions. The 3 patriarchs who were still in the fight were staring at Meng Hao with serious expressions, having been deeply moved by his display of power. The 3 old men exchanged glances, and then one said, "Even if that didn't kill him, at least it should have seriously injured him." But then their faces fell as Meng Hao's cold voice rang out from within the green lightning. "Well, isn't this interesting?" A figure flashed through the void toward the 9th bloodline patriarch. The old man's face flickered, and he bit his tongue, spitting up a mouthful of blood. "Second mirror," he cried. Another huge mirror appeared in the void, directly in Meng Hao's path. When he flew into the mirror, he actually emerged from the location of the first mirror. As he did, the other 2 patriarchs unleashed simultaneous attacks. The blood blade turned into a blood sea, and the green lightning became lightning chains, which shot out toward Meng Hao. Third mirror. Fourth mirror. As the 9th bloodline patriarch roared, blood oozed out of his eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. 4 mirrors was his limit, and as he unleashed the magic, more attacks shot out from them. The appearance of these mirrors caused the power of the various Taoist magics aimed at Meng Hao to increase dramatically. A boundless blood sea and seemingly infinite green chains rumbled through the starry sky toward Meng Hao. Down in the Meng clan ancestral mansion, all of the clan members were watching excitedly. As for Grandma Meng, her eyes were filled with concern. Just in the moment when all the other members of the Meng clan seemed so excited, an intense, rumbling sound echoed out from inside Meng Hao. "Nice, what a useful Taoist magic you have there," he said, sounding very enthusiastic. Suddenly, he began to radiate cultivation base power. Astonishingly, he hadn't been using his cultivation base at all in the fight. He had relied only on his fleshly body's strength. But now he called upon the power of an all-heaven Tao immortal. His energy rose up to towering heights, causing the blood sea to evaporate and the lightning chains to shatter. At the same time, Meng Hao's drawing upon the power of an all-heaven Tao immortal caused him to experience the sensation that the door of the ancient realm was coming. Although no one else could sense it, he fully understood what was happening. The arrival of the door of the ancient realm was imminent. He didn't need to call it. It could descend on its own at any time. Meng Hao's expression was calm as he strode forward, waving his finger, a motion that caused his all-heaven Tao immortal power to erupt out, and his 4 nirvana fruits began to rotate inside of him. That wave of a finger seemed capable of shattering the mountain and sea realm. When it landed on the mirror, cracking sounds rang out, and fissures spread out all over its surface. Then it simply shattered. When the first mirror shattered, the 9th bloodline patriarch coughed up a mouthful of blood. Then Meng Hao waved his finger again, causing the second mirror to explode. Then he waved his finger a third and a fourth time. The third and fourth mirrors both shattered into fragments. The 9th bloodline patriarch coughed up more blood, and his body withered. When they had first met, this man had acted completely arrogant, but now he was shivering and his scalp was numb as he cried, "I concede." In almost the same moment that the 2 words left the man's mouth, the void in front of him crumbled, only a few meters away from his position. That area emanated a powerful will of destruction, and the 9th bloodline patriarch knew that if he had been any slower in conceding, the collapse would have reached him. The mere thought of that caused him to gasp. His gaze, that happened merely from his gaze. His cultivation base is definitely similar to that of a Tao sovereign, but how come I can't sense much essence on him? Even as the 9th bloodline patriarch conceded, Meng Hao turned and waved his hand toward the patriarch proficient with the essences of blood and slaughter. Instantly, the starry sky began to shatter as a rift opened up and the blood demon emerged. It threw its head back and roared, which made everyone feel as if the blood in their own bodies had gone out of control. The blood demon then charged the Tao realm patriarch, emanating brutality, madness, and a thirst for blood. The slaughter essence patriarch's face fell. However, instead of retreating, he suddenly shot forward to fight the blood demon. Meng Hao gave a cold snort, appearing suddenly in front of the blood demon, whereupon he unleashed a punch. It was none other than the life extermination fist. As the fist flew out, the Tao realm patriarch's face fell. He wanted to retreat but had no time. The starry sky trembled and blood sprayed out of the patriarch's mouth. It was only then that he fell back, face filled with astonishment and terror. However, he wasn't giving up. As he retreated, his hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture, causing 9 coffins to fly out of his bag of holding, all of which emanated a sinister, cold air. At the same time, a funeral garland appeared in his hand, filled with blood-colored flowers. Using magical items in a puppet, Meng Hao asked, looking over at the man. There were never any rules that said we couldn't use magical items, the patriarch replied, his eyes flickering coldly. It was at this point that the strongest of the 5 patriarchs, the one with 4 essences, opened his mouth and spit out a green trident. Instantly, the starry sky trembled, and countless bolts of green lightning began to converge on him. Soon, he was shining a bright green color, which, in addition to the green lightning, made him look like an actual green lightning bolt. He hefted the trident and was just about to charge Meng Hao, when a long spear suddenly appeared in Meng Hao's hand. The spear looked like a dragon, and emanated a terrifying aura that caused the void to vibrate and even shatter. This was clearly a precious treasure. Even more shocking was that as soon as the long spear appeared, the funeral garland in the hand of the slaughter essence patriarch began to shake. Then, the blood-colored flower petals began to wilt and dry up. As for the 9 coffins, they emanated strange droning sound that seemed to be some sort of language. As soon as the patriarch heard those voices, his face fell. Things weren't over yet, though. The trident held by the nearly 4 essences patriarch almost seemed scared, as if an incredibly powerful enemy had suddenly appeared. The patriarch's face flickered, and his heart began to thump. This spear, which could cow other treasures, was none other than the weapon which greed had unsealed. If it was the type of weapon that greed would think was an incredible treasure, then obviously it wouldn't be weak. "Since you're using magical items, then I guess I'll use one of mine," Meng Hao said coolly. "I happened to meet a kind-hearted person who helped unseal this spear for me. I still haven't had a chance to get used to it, so I'm not sure if I can fully control it. Are you too sure you want to keep fighting?" He was now convinced that his battle prowess was enough to be able to fight a 4 essences Dao sovereign. However, as for whether or not he could fight 5 essences, that was a different matter. As soon as the words left his mouth, the remaining 2 patriarchs' faces turned very unsightly. They didn't believe at all what Meng Hao said about a kind-hearted individual unsealing the spear, especially one powerful enough to make their own treasures wither and tremble as if facing some arch-nemesis treasure. Who would believe that a person would voluntarily refine such a treasure for someone else? The more they thought about it, the more Meng Hao's line about the kind-hearted individual seemed like complete nonsense. Besides, if kind-hearted individuals like that really existed, why had they never run into one? To them, Meng Hao was using those words as an excuse, to be able to kill them under the guise of stumbling in battle. "I concede," said the patriarch adept with slaughter essence. Gritting his teeth, he waved his hand, causing the coffins and the funeral garland to vanish. The nearly 4 essences patriarch chuckled bitterly. The green glow faded and he put his trident away. Then he clasped hands and bowed. "I also concede," he said, looking at Meng Hao with a smile. "We're all from the same clan, so there's no need to fight to the death. As for the 10th bloodline, I admit that they are the primary bloodline and promise to support them. What do you say, young friend? Do you agree to end things here?" Meng Hao didn't respond. Instead, he looked up into the starry sky, a gleam of anticipation in his eyes. Simultaneously, the 5 Dao Realm patriarchs all looked up in shock. The door of the ancient realm was coming.